What happens when a woman society has already buried alive dares to love again? In the unforgiving frontier town of Red Hollow, 46-year-old widow Clara Whitlock has spent 11 years perfecting invisibility, until the day a weathered rancher named Ethan Cross walks through her door and sees everything she's tried to hide. Their forbidden connection will ignite a scandal that threatens to destroy her, force impossible choices, and challenge every rule this dust-choked town lives by. This is a story about defiance, desire, and discovering that the heart's fiercest battles come not at the beginning of life, but in its bold, beautiful middle. Stay with me until the very end, and don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The morning light fell through Clara Whitlock's shop window like an accusation, illuminating every dust mote suspended in the stale air. She sat at her sewing table, the same scarred oak surface where she'd spent the last 11 years of her life, and wondered, not for the first time, if this was all there would ever be. Thread and needle, fabric and silence. The endless, suffocating quiet of a life half-lived. Her fingers moved automatically through the familiar motions, repairing a tear in Martha Henderson's Sunday dress. The stitches were perfect, as always. Clara Whitlock's stitches were legendary in Red Hollow. Small, even, nearly invisible, just like the woman who made them. She was 46 years old, though some mornings she felt ancient, and others she felt like that frightened girl who'd arrived in Red Hollow 23 years ago with stars in her eyes and a husband full of promises. Thomas Whitlock had been handsome, charming, and utterly unprepared for the brutal realities of frontier life. The consumption took him slowly, over 18 agonizing months, until all that remained was Clara and a shop full of fabric she could barely afford. That was 11 years ago, 11 years of existing in the margins, 11 years of watching other people's lives unfold while hers remained frozen in place, like a photograph slowly fading in the sun. The bell above her door chimed. Clara didn't look up immediately. Customers in Red Hollow always came with the same predictable needs. A hem shortened, buttons replaced, a torn seam mended. She'd learned to read them by their footsteps alone. The sharp click-click of Rebecca Morrison's heels meant another fashionable dress from the catalog that needed altering. The shuffling steps of old Mr. Chen meant work clothes worn thin that needed reinforcing. The quick, impatient stride of Mayor Thornton's wife meant... But these footsteps were different. Heavy, measured, uncertain, male. Clara's hands stilled on the fabric. Men didn't come to her shop. They sent their wives, their daughters, their housekeepers. A man entering a seamstress's establishment was as rare as rain in August, and usually meant only one thing: desperation. She looked up. The man standing in her doorway seemed to fill the entire frame, though he wasn't exceptionally tall, perhaps 5'10", with broad shoulders that spoke of hard labor and a face weathered by sun and wind. He held his hat in his hands, turning it in a slow circle, and his eyes swept the shop with the careful assessment of someone used to evaluating his surroundings for threats. Those eyes landed on Clara, and something in her chest tightened. They were gray, storm cloud gray, and in them she saw something she recognized instantly because she saw it every morning in her own mirror: loneliness. "Ma'am." His voice was rough, like gravel rolling in a creek bed. "I was told you do mending." Clara found her voice, though it emerged shakier than she'd intended. "I do. I've got a coat that needs repair." He gestured to the heavy canvas jacket draped over his arm. "Caught it on barbed wire, tore clean through." She stood, smoothing her skirts automatically, a nervous habit she'd never quite broken. "Let me see." He crossed the room in 3 long strides and laid the coat on her work table. The tear was substantial, running nearly 8 inches along the left sleeve, but it was clean. Easy to fix if you knew what you were doing. Clara ran her fingers along the damage, assessing. The fabric was good quality, well-maintained despite obvious age and hard use. This was the coat of a man who took care of his belongings because he couldn't afford to replace them casually. "I can repair this," she said, already calculating thread weight and stitch pattern in her mind. "It'll take about 2 days." "That's fine." He paused, then added, "Name's Ethan Cross. I've got a ranch about 8 miles north of town, the old Patterson place." Clara knew it. Everyone knew it. The Patterson place had sat abandoned for nearly 5 years after old Samuel Patterson died without heirs. The land was good, but the house and outbuildings had fallen into disrepair. She'd heard someone had bought it 6 months ago, but this was the first time she'd seen the new owner. Clara Whitlock, she offered, though he almost certainly knew who she was already. In a town of barely 300 souls, anonymity was impossible. Mrs. Whitlock. Well, he nodded, a slight inclination of his head that managed to convey respect without condescension. I appreciate your help. He settled on a price, fair, perhaps even generous, and turned to leave. But at the door he paused, glancing back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You did the alterations on Doc Warren's suit last month, he said. It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. I did. Finest work I've seen in 3 territories. Doc showed it off like he was wearing something from San Francisco. Heat crept up Clara's neck. Compliments were rare, and she'd forgotten how to receive them gracefully. Thank you, Mr. Cross. He settled his hat on his head, and for just a moment something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Then he was gone, the bell chiming his departure. Clara stood in the sudden silence, staring at the coat on her table. Her heart was beating faster than it should have been, and her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the damaged sleeve. Don't be foolish, she told herself firmly. He's just a customer, nothing more. But that night, as she lay in her narrow bed in the apartment above the shop, she couldn't stop thinking about those gray eyes and the loneliness she'd seen reflected in them. She couldn't have known then that this was the beginning of everything changing. Ethan Cross returned 3 days later for his coat. Clara had the repair finished in 2 days, as promised, but she'd spent the extra day doing something she couldn't quite explain to herself. She'd reinforced all the other stress points in the garment, replaced 2 buttons that were starting to fray, and carefully cleaned a stain from the collar that she suspected was old coffee. When he walked through her door that second time, she felt that same flutter in her chest, half anticipation, half alarm. Mr. Cross? She retrieved the coat from the back room, handing it to him carefully. It's ready. He examined her work with the same careful attention he'd used to survey her shop on his first visit. His fingers traced the repaired sleeve, then moved to the collar, the buttons, the reinforced seams. You did more than I asked, he said quietly. Clara felt defensive suddenly, as if she'd been caught in some foolish act of charity. The work needed doing, no extra charge. That's not right. You should be paid for your labor. Consider it an investment in my reputation, Mr. Cross. I can't have people walking around in substandard repairs wearing my work. The corner of his mouth twitched again, that almost smile that made him look younger, less careworn. In that case, Mrs. Whitlock, I'm grateful for your investment. He paid her the agreed-upon price, but before he left, he paused at the door again. The late afternoon sun slanted through the window, turning the dust motes golden and catching in his gray eyes. Would you consider taking on another project? He asked. Of course. What do you need? Curtains. The house is, well, it's livable, but it's bare. No woman's touch in probably a decade. I could use curtains for the main room and the 2 bedrooms. Clara's breath caught. Curtains were a substantial commission, the kind that would keep her busy for weeks and pay better than a month of basic mending. But there was something in his request that felt weighted with more than just business. A man ordering curtains was a man planning to stay. To make a home, not just a shelter. I'd need to see the windows, she said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. Take measurements. Of course. He shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncertain, an expression that sat strangely on a man who otherwise carried himself with quiet confidence. Would it be appropriate for me to drive you out there, to take a look? And there it was, the question beneath the question. In Red Hollow, as in every small frontier town, reputation mattered. A widow visiting a bachelor's ranch alone could set tongues wagging for months. Clara should have said no, should have suggested he take the measurements himself and bring them to her, should have maintained the careful distance that had protected her for 11 years. Instead, she heard herself say, Saturday afternoon would work. 2 o'clock? The smile that broke across Ethan Cross's face was like sunrise after a long night. 2 o'clock, he agreed. I'll be here. The next 2 days passed with agonizing slowness. Clara tried to focus on her work. Eleanor Winters needed a dress taken in, the Murphy boy had torn his school clothes again, Mr. Chen's work shirts required their monthly reinforcement, but her mind kept drifting to Saturday afternoon. She told herself it was just business, a significant commission that would ease her finances for months. Nothing more. But she also found herself standing in front of her small wardrobe Friday evening, examining the 4 dresses she owned with a critical eye she hadn't employed in years. They were all serviceable, well-made, appropriate for a woman of her station. They were also uniformly gray or brown, designed to help her disappear into the woodwork. When had she decided to become invisible? The question bothered her more than it should have. Saturday morning, Clara woke before dawn and did something she hadn't done in over a decade. She washed her hair in the good soap, the lavender-scented bar she'd been saving for no particular occasion, and took time to dry it properly by the stove, brushing it until it shone. The mirror showed her what she already knew. She was 46 years old, with lines around her eyes and silver threading through hair that had once been the color of maple syrup. Her hands were work-worn, her figure had settled into the comfortable curves of middle age. But her eyes, she'd forgotten how green they were, how alive they could look when she wasn't actively trying to fade away. She chose the brown dress because it was practical, but she spent extra time on the small touches. The cameo brooch that had been her mother's, the careful arrangement of her hair. When she caught herself pinching her cheeks for color, she stopped abruptly, feeling foolish. "You're being ridiculous," she told her reflection sternly. "He's just a customer." At precisely 2 o'clock, Ethan Cross's wagon pulled up in front of her shop. Clara had been watching from the window, another thing she wouldn't admit to anyone, including herself, and she saw him climb down, brush dust from his clothes, and run a hand through his dark hair before approaching her door. He'd made an effort too, she realized. Clean shirt, pressed trousers, boots recently polished. The observation sent a dangerous warmth through her chest. "Mrs. Whitlock." He removed his hat as she opened the door. "Thank you for agreeing to this." "It's business, Mr. Cross." She kept her voice prim, professional. "I'm happy for the work." But as he helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hand warm and steady on her elbow, she felt something shift inside her, like ice beginning to crack after a long winter. The ride north took about 45 minutes. For the first 10, they traveled in silence, Clara acutely aware of his presence beside her, the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves, the vast blue sky stretching overhead. It was Ethan who finally spoke. "How long have you been in Red Hollow, Mrs. Whitlock?" 23 years. My husband and I came west from Ohio when I was 23. "And you've been alone?" 11 years. The words came out flat, automatic. She'd said them so many times they'd lost their weight, become just another fact of her existence. Ethan nodded slowly. "That's a long time." Something in his tone, not pity, but understanding, made her look at him sharply. "And you, Mr. Cross? Where do you come from?" "Colorado, most recently. Before that, Wyoming. Before that," he shrugged. "I've been moving for a long time. Decided it was time to stop." "What changed?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I woke up one morning and realized I'd been running from ghosts for 15 years. Figured it was time to face them instead." The raw honesty in his voice caught Clara off guard. This wasn't the kind of conversation people had in Red Hollow. Here, you kept your pain buried deep, your grief private, your struggles invisible. You certainly didn't share them with virtual strangers on a Saturday afternoon wagon ride. "What kind of ghosts?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "The usual kind. Lost people, bad choices, roads not taken." He glanced at her, and in his eyes she saw that recognition again, the understanding that comes from shared experience. "What about you, Mrs. Whitlock? What ghosts keep you company?" She should have deflected, should have changed the subject or made some light remark about the weather. Instead, she found herself answering with equal honesty. "The ghost of who I thought I'd be, the life I thought I'd live." She paused, surprised by the tightness in her throat. "I was going to have children, 5 of them, a house full of noise and chaos and love. Thomas and I had it all planned out. But consumption doesn't care about plans. And after he died, I was 35 years old, alone, with a business barely keeping me afloat. Not exactly prime marriage material in a town where most women are married by 20. "That's the town talking," Ethan said quietly. Not the truth. Clara turned to look at him fully. What's the truth then? He met her gaze, and something in the air between them seemed to crystallize, become solid and real. The truth is that you're a woman who survived when survival took everything you had, who built something from nothing, who's still here, still standing, still fighting. He paused. That's not someone the world's finished with, Mrs. Whitlock. That's someone who's just getting started. The words hit her like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had seen her, really seen her, as more than the town's reliable seamstress? When had anyone looked at her and seen potential instead of a life already lived and settled? She couldn't speak, could barely breathe. So she simply looked away, blinking against the sudden sting in her eyes, and pretended to focus on the landscape rolling past. But something had shifted between them, some invisible barrier crossed, and they both knew it. The Patterson place, Ethan's place now, appeared on the horizon like a promise. The main house was a solid two-story structure of weathered wood and stone, sitting in a small valley with a creek running along the eastern boundary. The land rolled gently, covered in tough prairie grass that bent and swayed in the constant wind. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way that Clara recognized immediately. This was land that would take everything you had to give and demand more. Land that would break you if you let it. But it could also make you strong. Ethan helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. Clara told herself it was her imagination, but the warmth of his touch seemed to burn through the layers of her dress. It's not much yet, he said, gesturing to the house. But it's got good bones, strong foundation, the roof's sound, the walls are straight. Everything else is just details. Clara smiled despite herself. Most people would say the details are what make a house a home. Then I guess that's why I need your help. The interior of the house was exactly what she'd expected. Functional, clean, but utterly devoid of warmth. Bare floors, empty walls, furniture that looked like it had been chosen purely for utility. A place to sleep and eat, not to live. But the windows were magnificent, large, well-proportioned, flooding the rooms with light. Windows that would showcase the spectacular frontier sunsets and transform the harsh landscape outside into living art. Clara moved from room to room, her practiced eye already measuring, calculating, envisioning. She could see it all so clearly. Deep green curtains in the main room to echo the color of the distant pine forests, soft cream in the bedrooms to catch and hold the morning light, simple ties rather than elaborate swags, because this was a working ranch, not a San Francisco parlor. You're smiling, Ethan observed from the doorway of the second bedroom. Clara startled slightly. She'd been so absorbed in her vision that she'd almost forgotten his presence. I was just planning. I can see what needs to be done. Tell me. So she did. She walked him through each room, describing fabrics and colors, explaining how the right curtains could transform light and space, how small touches of beauty could make a house feel like a home. She talked more than she had in months, maybe years, her usual careful reserve dropping away as professional passion took over. And Ethan listened, really listened. Asked questions that showed he understood what she was describing, offered opinions that revealed better taste than most frontier ranchers possessed. How do you know so much about this? Clara asked finally, her curiosity overcoming propriety. He looked uncomfortable for the first time that afternoon. My mother had an eye for these things. Before, he trailed off, then started again. She used to say that beauty wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity, that a person could survive anything if they had something beautiful to hold on to. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. Past tense, Clara noted. Another ghost. They finished the measurements in the master bedroom, Ethan's room, though the bed was neatly made and the space was as impersonal as a hotel. Clara tried not to notice the intimacy of standing in a man's bedroom, of seeing where he slept, of imagining, "Stop it," she ordered herself firmly. But when she turned to gather her things, she nearly collided with Ethan. He was standing closer than she'd realized, and for a frozen moment they were face to face, barely a foot apart. She could see the individual silver threads in his dark hair, the small scar on his left cheekbone, the way his pupils dilated slightly as he looked at her. Clara. Her name. Just her name, but the way he said it made her heart stutter. I should... She gestured vaguely toward the door. I have everything I need. He didn't move. Do you? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. They both knew he wasn't talking about measurements anymore. Mr. Cross. Ethan, please. Ethan. His name felt strange on her tongue, too familiar, too intimate. We barely know each other. I know you're the most interesting person I've met in 10 years. I know you see the world differently than everyone else in this town. I know when you talk about your work, your whole face lights up and you forget to hide. He paused. And I know you feel this too. Clara's breath caught. She should deny it, should step back, restore the proper distance, remind him that she was a respectable widow and he was a customer, and this was entirely inappropriate. But she was so tired of lying, to the town, to herself, to the universe that had stolen her dreams and left her with this half-life of careful invisibility. Yes, she whispered, I feel it. The confession hung in the air between them like something fragile and precious. Ethan's hand came up slowly, giving her every opportunity to retreat, and gently cupped her cheek. His palm was rough with calluses, warm, solid, real. I'm 44 years old, he said quietly. I've got more scars than money, more regrets than I can count, and a ranch that needs more work than 3 men could manage. I'm not a prize catch, Clara. And I'm 46, she countered, her voice shaking. With gray hair, work-worn hands, and a reputation for being cold and distant. The town's dried-up old widow who probably hasn't felt anything in years. The town's wrong. People will talk. People always talk. It could ruin my business, ruin me. Or, Ethan said softly, his thumb brushing her cheekbone, it could save us both. The kiss, when it came, was nothing like the ones she remembered from her youth with Thomas. Those had been sweet, tentative, the kisses of children playing at being grown-ups. This was the kiss of 2 people who'd walked through fire and somehow found each other on the other side. Desperate and tender, hungry and careful, full of all the loneliness and longing they'd both been carrying for far too long. Clara's hands came up to grip his shirt, anchoring herself as the world tilted and reformed around her. She felt like she was falling and flying at the same time, terrified and exhilarated and more alive than she'd been in 11 years. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara's mind was racing. What had she done? What was she doing? This was madness, recklessness, everything she'd sworn she'd never be again after Thomas died and left her alone and nearly destitute. But Ethan was looking at her like she was something precious, something worth holding on to, and she couldn't remember the last time anyone had looked at her that way. Stay for dinner, he said. Please, just dinner. We can talk, get to know each other properly. I'll drive you home before dark. Nothing improper. Everything about this was improper, but Clara found herself nodding. Just dinner. Ethan proved to be a surprisingly capable cook. Nothing fancy, just beef stew from the pot he'd had simmering on the stove all day, fresh bread from town, strong coffee, but it was good, hearty food served with care. They ate at his small kitchen table as the afternoon light began to fade, and they talked. Really talked, in a way Clara hadn't talked to anyone in years. He told her about growing up in Montana, the youngest of 4 brothers on a cattle ranch that had failed during the hard winter of '87. About working his way south, taking whatever jobs he could find, saving every penny. About the wife he'd married at 23, Sarah, her name was, who'd died in childbirth along with their daughter. I was 25, he said, staring into his coffee cup. Too young to be a widower, too old to pretend it didn't break something in me. I spent the next 15 years trying to outrun it, trying to work hard enough that I'd fall into bed too exhausted to remember. Took me until last year to realize it wasn't working. What changed last year? I turned 43 and looked in the mirror and saw my father staring back at me. He died angry and bitter at 65, still grieving my mother 20 years after she passed. I realized I was following the same path. He looked up at her, his gray eyes steady. I decided I'd rather live the rest of my life than just survive it. Clara understood that completely. I've been surviving, she admitted, for 11 years, just existing, going through the motions. I told myself it was enough, that asking for more was greedy. What do you want, Clara? If you could have anything. The question was so simple, yet she couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked her. What did she want? I want to feel something, she heard herself say. Anything. Fear, joy, or anger, or hope. I want to stop being invisible. I want... She trailed off, afraid of admitting the deepest truth. Say it. I want to matter to someone again. Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. His fingers wove through hers, solid and sure. You matter to me. You barely know me. I know enough, and I'd like to know more. All of it, if you'll let me. The sun was setting, painting the sky outside in shades of gold and crimson. Clara knew she should go, should insist he drive her home immediately before full dark fell, and anyone noticed how long she'd been gone. But she didn't want to leave, didn't want to return to her narrow bed and her silent shop and her invisible life. The town will crucify us, she warned. A widow and a bachelor, keeping company. They'll call me desperate. They'll say you're taking advantage. They'll talk, Ethan finished. Like you said. But here's what I think, Clara. I think we've both spent enough years living for other people's opinions, for what's proper and appropriate and expected. Maybe it's time we lived for ourselves. It's not that simple. Why not? Because it would mean risking everything. Her business, her reputation, the careful, safe life she'd built from the wreckage of her dreams. Because at 46, you weren't supposed to get second chances. Because the world didn't work that way. But looking into Ethan's eyes, seeing the hope and hunger there, reflections of her own, Clara found herself wondering, what if it could be that simple? What if she could choose this? Choose him. Choose life instead of survival. I need time, she said finally, to think, to process all of this. Take all the time you need. But his hand tightened on hers, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. Just promise me you'll really think about it. Not about what the town wants, or what's proper, or what people will say. Think about what you want. What would make you happy? I'm not sure I remember what happy feels like. Then maybe, Ethan said softly, it's time to learn again. The ride back to town was quieter than the journey out, but it was a different kind of silence. Charged. Weighted with possibility. Ethan kept his promise, delivering Clara to her shop just as twilight was settling over Red Hollow. But before she climbed down from the wagon, he caught her hand one more time. I meant what I said, Clara. All of it. You matter. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and hurried inside before her resolve could crumble completely. That night, Clara lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of the afternoon. The kiss. The conversation. The way Ethan had looked at her like she was someone worth knowing, worth wanting, worth fighting for. She thought about his question, what do you want? For 11 years she'd wanted nothing, desired nothing, expected nothing. It had been safer that way, easier to avoid disappointment when you stopped hoping for anything better. But now she wanted everything, wanted to feel Ethan's lips on hers again, wanted more afternoons of easy conversation and shared meals, wanted to wake up beside someone who saw her, really saw her, instead of just the careful mask she showed the world. She wanted to live. The realization was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with dreams that left her flushed and restless. Sunday morning brought Clara back to reality with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. She'd barely opened her shop when Eleanor Winters swept in, her eyes alight with the particular gleam of someone bearing fresh gossip. Clara, I heard the most interesting thing at church this morning. Clara's heart sank. She carefully set down the dress she'd been examining and arranged her face into polite interest. Oh? Apparently someone saw you leaving town with Ethan Cross yesterday afternoon. In his wagon. Alone. Eleanor's voice practically vibrated with scandalized delight. You weren't mentioned by name, of course, but really there's only one seamstress in town, and Rebecca Morrison said she tried to stop by here around 3, and you were closed on a Saturday afternoon. The accusation hung in the air. Saturday afternoon was prime business hours. Clara never closed on Saturday afternoons. Mr. Cross commissioned some curtains for his house, Clara said, pleased with how steady her voice remained. I needed to take measurements. It's a substantial commission. Still, Eleanor leaned in conspiratorially. People are talking, dear. You know how it is. A widow of your age going alone to a bachelor's ranch. Well, it doesn't look proper. I'm sure you were perfectly innocent, but appearances matter in a town like ours. Up as a translation. You've given us something to gossip about, and we're going to milk it for all it's worth. I appreciate your concern, Eleanor, Clara said, ice forming in her voice despite her best efforts. But my business dealings are exactly that, business. Now, wasn't there a dress you needed taken in? Eleanor left 20 minutes later, slightly subdued but certainly not chastened. And she was just the first. By noon, Clara had endured 3 more friendly visits from concerned townswomen, each one eager to remind her of the importance of reputation, of propriety, of not giving people reason to talk. By evening, she was exhausted and frustrated and angry in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be in years. Who decided these rules? Who determined that a 46-year-old widow shouldn't be allowed to ride in a wagon with a man? That 11 years of loneliness should somehow earn her the right to a few hours of conversation and company? She was measuring out fabric for Eleanor's dress, mechanical work that required no thought, when the bell above her door chimed again. Clara looked up, expecting another concerned neighbor, and found Ethan standing in her doorway instead. He looked uncertain, holding his hat in his hands, and Clara's heart ached at the sight of him. I heard, he said without preamble, about the talk. Half the town stopped by my ranch today to pick up feed or return tools they'd borrowed months ago. Amazing how many people suddenly needed to see me in person. I'm sorry. Don't be. I knew what I was doing. Question is, are you all right? The concern in his voice nearly undid her. When was the last time someone had asked if she was all right and actually cared about the answer? I'm fine, she lied. Clara. Just her name, but it cracked something open inside her. No, she admitted. I'm not fine. I'm angry and confused and scared, and I don't know what to do. Ethan crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands in his. Tell me what you're thinking, all of it. I'm thinking that I'm too old for this, that I should know better than to risk everything I've built for what? A few kisses, some pleasant conversation? What if it doesn't work? What if it does? Clara stopped, startled by the simple question. What if it does work, Clara? What if this is exactly what we both need? What if we could be happy together? He squeezed her hands gently. I know the town's already judging us. I know this is hard, but I need you to know something. I'm not going anywhere. This isn't a whim for me. You're not just convenient. You're extraordinary, and I will wait as long as it takes for you to believe that. The talk will only get worse if we keep seeing each other. Probably. I could lose customers, lose my business. You could. Or you could gain something better. He paused. But that's your choice to make, not mine. I won't pressure you, Clara. If you want me to leave, if you want to forget Saturday ever happened, I'll respect that. But if you want to see where this goes, I'm here. I'm willing to weather the storm if you are. Clara looked into his gray eyes and saw nothing but honesty. No manipulation, no empty promises, no hidden agenda, just a man offering her a choice, the first real choice she'd had in years. Live or survive. Risk or retreat. Fight or surrender. I need time, she said again. You've got it. Ethan brought her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. The gesture was old-fashioned, courtly, and it made Clara's chest tighten. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. After he left, Clara stood in the middle of her shop, surrounded by half-finished projects and the ghosts of 11 years of carefully maintained invisibility. What did she want? She wanted to be brave. She wanted to matter. She wanted Ethan Cross and everything he represented, risk and hope, and the terrifying possibility of joy. But wanting and having were different things. And the cost might be everything. The next week was hell. The gossip that had started as speculation hardened into certainty. Clara could feel it in the way conversation stopped when she entered the general store, in the calculating looks from the other women at the fabric counter, in the way even Rebecca Morrison, who'd been a friend or at least friendly, crossed the street to avoid speaking to her. Only Margaret Chen, the elderly Chinese laundress who'd faced her own share of prejudice, stopped by with tea and a knowing look. They talk because they're scared, Margaret said, pouring strong black tea into Clara's cups. Scared that if you can break their rules and be happy, maybe their rules are worthless. I haven't broken anything, Clara protested. Nothing's even happened. Something's changed in you. They can see it. You're not invisible anymore. Margaret smiled. That terrifies them. The word stuck with Clara long after Margaret left. Was that it? Was she threatening their carefully maintained social order simply by daring to be visible? By wanting something for herself instead of accepting her assigned role as the town's reliable, invisible seamstress? The thought made her angry, then angrier. She was 46 years old. She'd survived her husband's death, built a business from nothing, and spent 11 years being exactly what Red Hollow wanted her to be. Quiet, undemanding, safely neutered. And for what? So Eleanor Winters could feel superior? So Rebecca Morrison could use her as a cautionary tale? Ethan stayed away, respecting her request for time, but he sent a note midweek, just a few lines in rough, unpracticed handwriting. Thinking of you. No pressure. But I'm here when you're ready. Clara kept the note in her pocket and touched it throughout the day, like a talisman. Friday evening, she was closing up the shop when Mayor Thornton himself appeared at her door. This couldn't be good. Mrs. Whitlock. He removed his hat, but his expression was stern. Might I have a word? Clara's stomach dropped, but she held her ground. Of course, Mayor Thornton, please come in. He entered stiffly, clearly uncomfortable. Mayor Thornton was a good man by Red Hollow standards, fair, honest, devoted to the town's welfare. But he was also deeply conservative, committed to maintaining social order above all else. I'll get straight to the point, he said. There's been considerable talk about you and Mr. Cross. I'm sure you're aware. I'm aware that people in this town have too little to occupy their time, Clara said, her voice sharper than she'd intended. Now, Clara, you know how important reputation is, especially for a businesswoman. Your livelihood depends on the goodwill of this community. My livelihood depends on the quality of my work. In an ideal world, perhaps. But we don't live in an ideal world. He sighed, looking genuinely troubled. I'm not here to judge you, truly, but I am here to warn you. Some of the more influential ladies in town are talking about taking their business elsewhere, to the seamstress in Coopersville. Clara felt as if she'd been slapped. Coopersville was 30 miles away, hardly convenient. For Red Hollow's women to travel that far for alterations meant they were willing to go to significant trouble to punish her. Because I took measurements at a customer's ranch? Because you were seen alone with a man at his private residence for several hours? Because people believe there's something improper happening? He paused. Is there? The question hung in the air. Clara could lie, could demur, could promise to be more careful about appearances, or she could tell the truth. Mr. Cross and I have become friends, she said carefully. Whether that friendship develops into something more, that's between us. Mayor Thornton's expression tightened. Clara, please, think about what you're saying. You're a widow of a certain age. Cross is a newcomer with no family connections, no established reputation. Even if his intentions are honorable, why wouldn't they be? That's not the point. The point is perception, and right now the perception is that you're behaving inappropriately. I'm asking you, as a friend and as someone who cares about this town, to be more discreet. At least until there's something official to announce, if there ever is. Translation, hide it, be ashamed. Don't let your happiness be visible. Clara felt something inside her snap, the final thread holding together 11 years of careful compliance. Thank you for your concern, Mayor Thornton, she said, her voice cold. But my personal life is my own business. I will continue to serve my customers to the best of my ability. If they choose to take their business elsewhere because I had a conversation with a man, that's their choice. Good evening. She opened the door, a clear dismissal. Mayor Thornton looked startled, then affronted, then resigned. I hope you know what you're doing, Clara, he said as he left. As the door closed behind him, Clara sank into her chair, shaking. She did know what she was doing. She was choosing herself. Finally, terrifyingly, she was choosing her own life over everyone else's expectations. The question was, what now? Saturday morning, Clara woke with crystalline clarity. She washed, dressed in her best dress, a deep blue she rarely wore, and pinned up her hair with extra care. Then she walked to the livery stable and rented a horse. The stable master, old Tom Peterson, raised his eyebrows but took her money without comment. Everyone in town knew she could ride. She'd just chosen not to for the last 11 years. Today she was choosing differently. The ride to Ethan's ranch took her nearly 2 hours. She was out of practice, and her muscles protested, but there was something liberating about being alone on horseback, the vast prairie stretching around her, the wind in her face. By the time his house came into view, Clara knew exactly what she was going to say. Ethan was in the corral, working with a young horse. He looked up as she approached, and the expression that crossed his face, surprise, hope, joy, made her heart stutter. He vaulted over the fence with surprising grace and was at her side before she could dismount, his hand steadying her as she slid from the saddle. "Clara." "I've made a decision," she said, before courage could fail her. "All right." "The town is talking. They're threatening to boycott my business. The mayor came to warn me about propriety. Several women have already made it clear they disapprove." She took a breath. "And I don't care." Ethan's hands tightened on her waist. "You don't care?" "I've spent 11 years being what everyone else wanted me to be, being invisible, being safe, being alone." She looked up at him, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she spoke her absolute truth. "I don't want to be alone anymore, Ethan. I don't want to be safe. I want to live. With you. If you'll have me." The kiss was different this time, not desperate, but deliberate. A promise sealed, a future claimed. When they broke apart, Ethan was smiling, really smiling, and it transformed his face from weathered to wonderful. "I'll have you," he said, "on any terms, for as long as you'll stay." "Then we'd better talk about curtains," Clara said, and laughed at the surprised joy in his eyes. "Because if I'm going to be spending time here, this place needs some serious work." They spent the afternoon planning, not just curtains, but a future. Talking about practical things like how to manage her business and his ranch, about whether she'd move to his place or he'd come to town, about how to weather the inevitable storm. But mostly they talked about hope, about second chances, about the terrifying, exhilarating possibility that maybe, just maybe, the best parts of their lives weren't behind them after all. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Clara stood on Ethan's porch and looked out at the vast frontier landscape. It was harsh and unforgiving and beautiful, this land. It would take everything she had, but for the first time in 11 years, she was ready to give it, ready to fight, ready to live. Behind her, Ethan's hand found hers, warm and solid and sure, and Clara Whitlock, the invisible widow, the forgotten seamstress, the woman who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. She squeezed back. This was just the beginning. The scandal broke in earnest on Monday morning. Clara arrived at her shop to find a note slipped under the door. The handwriting was anonymous, the message anything but. "Decent women don't behave as you do. You shame yourself and this town. Leave Red Hollow before you corrupt others with your sinful ways." She crumpled the paper in her fist, hands shaking with rage rather than fear. This was what courage cost, apparently. This was the price of choosing life over invisibility. By noon, 3 more notes had appeared, each more vitriolic than the last. Clara burned them all in her stove and tried to focus on the dress she was hemming for Sarah Murphy, but her fingers kept slipping, her stitches uneven in a way they hadn't been in 20 years. The afternoon brought worse. Mrs. Rebecca Morrison swept into the shop with Clara's latest commission, a beautiful green velvet dress Clara had spent 2 weeks creating, and dropped it on the counter like something contaminated. "I won't be needing this after all," Rebecca announced, her voice carrying the particular satisfaction of the righteously indignant. "I've decided to patronize Mrs. Henderson in Coopersville from now on. She may not be as skilled, but at least she understands proper behavior." Clara's throat tightened, but she kept her voice level. "The dress is finished, Rebecca. You owe me for the materials and labor. Send me a bill. My husband will handle it." Rebecca's eyes glittered with malice. "You know, Clara, I actually felt sorry for you all these years. Poor lonely widow, working so hard to make ends meet. Now I see you were just waiting for the right opportunity to throw away every shred of decency. I took measurements at a customer's house. You were alone with a bachelor for hours. You rode out to his ranch again on Saturday. Don't bother denying it," Tom Peterson told everyone. "A woman your age chasing after a man like some desperate— Get out." Clara's voice was quiet but sharp as broken glass. Rebecca blinked, apparently shocked that the invisible seamstress had just spoken to her with something other than deference. "Excuse me? Get out of my shop, now, and take your dress with you. I don't want your money, and I certainly don't want your judgment." "Well!" Rebecca snatched up the dress, her face flushed with outrage. "You'll regret this, Clara Whitlock. You'll regret choosing that drifter over the goodwill of this community. Mark my words, you'll be ruined within a month." The door slammed behind her hard enough to rattle the windows. Clara stood alone in the sudden silence, her heart pounding. She'd just told Rebecca Morrison, wife of the second richest man in Red Hollow, leader of the Ladies' Church Guild, unofficial arbiter of social acceptability, to leave her shop. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt strangely exhilarated. The bell chimed again. Clara tensed, expecting another confrontation, but it was only Margaret Chen carrying a covered basket. "I saw Rebecca leave," Margaret said mildly, setting the basket on the counter. "Thought you might need this." Inside was fresh bread, still warm, and a jar of Margaret's special ginger tea. Simple things, but they made Clara's eyes burn with unexpected tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "But, they'll come for me next," Margaret said, settling into the chair by the window with the ease of someone who'd weathered many storms. "For being your friend. They'll say I'm encouraging sin or some such nonsense." "Margaret, you don't have to—" "Hush. I'm 73 years old. I've been called worse things than a sinner in my time." She smiled, her weathered face creasing with genuine warmth. "Besides, I like you better when you're fighting. You've been dead inside for too long, Clara. It's good to see you alive again, even if it hurts." Clara sank into the other chair, suddenly exhausted. "Did you ever—" She paused, searching for the right words. "When you first came here with your husband, did you face this kind of hatred?" "Worse. Much worse." Margaret's expression grew distant. "They wouldn't serve us in the stores, wouldn't let our children attend school. My husband worked twice as hard for half the pay, and we were still treated like we didn't belong." She paused. "But we stayed. Built our life anyway. And eventually most of them came around, not all. There are still some who cross the street rather than speak to me. But enough." "How long did it take?" 20 years, give or take." Margaret laughed at Clara's expression. "I know, that's not the encouraging answer you wanted, but here's what matters. Those 20 years were worth it. Because we lived them on our own terms, not theirs. We were happy, Clara. Despite everything, we were genuinely happy." Clara thought about that as Margaret left. 20 years of struggle for happiness. Was it worth it? Then she thought about the alternative. Another 20 years of invisible safety, of careful loneliness, of half-life in the margins. The answer was clear. That evening, Ethan arrived at her shop just as she was closing. He dismounted quickly, his face creased with concern. "I heard about Rebecca Morrison and the notes." His hands clenched at his sides. "Clara, if this is too much, if you want to slow down—" "No." The word came out more forcefully than she'd intended. "I'm done slowing down, done hiding, done apologizing for wanting something. The whole town is talking. They're saying, I don't care what they're saying." Clara stepped closer to him, close enough that anyone passing by would see them together, would have fresh fodder for gossip. "Let them talk, Ethan. Let them say whatever they want. I'm choosing you. I'm choosing this. And I'm not backing down." The fierce joy that lit his face made her breath catch. He pulled her into his arms right there on the street, in full view of anyone who cared to look, and kissed her like she was something precious he'd thought he'd lost and miraculously found again. When they broke apart, Clara saw curtains twitching in several windows across the street. Tomorrow there would be fresh scandals, fresh outrage. She couldn't bring herself to care. "Come inside," she said, taking his hand. "I want to show you the fabric samples I've selected for your curtains. Our curtains." She corrected herself, testing the words. If you want, I want." His hand tightened on hers. "I want everything with you, Clara. The curtains, the gossip, the struggle, all of it. As long as we're together." They spent the evening bent over fabric samples and sketches, talking through designs and colors while the light faded outside. It was domestic and peaceful and utterly scandalous. A bachelor and a widow, alone together in her shop after dark. Clara had never felt more content. Around 8, Ethan reluctantly prepared to leave. I should go before it gets too late. Don't want to give them more ammunition. They already have plenty of ammunition, Clara pointed out. Another hour won't make much difference. True, but I also don't want to compromise you more than I already have. The old-fashioned concern touched her. You haven't compromised me, Ethan. This is my choice. I know, but I want to do this right. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. I want to court you properly, take you to dinner, drive you around town in daylight, let everyone see that my intentions are honorable. Your intentions are honorable? Completely. His smile was soft. I intend to marry you, Clara Whitlock, if you'll have me. The words hung in the air between them, more binding than any formal proposal. This wasn't a question asked on bended knee with a ring and pretty speeches. This was a simple statement of intent, of future plans made real. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. That's quite an intention. Too much? No. She kissed him, soft and sure. Not too much. Just enough. After he left, Clara lay awake in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about marriage, about being Mrs. Ethan Cross instead of Mrs. Thomas Whitlock, about leaving this shop, this apartment, this carefully constructed life. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home to a place she'd never been before. The next morning brought a new challenge. Clara arrived at her shop to find 4 of her regular customers waiting outside, their faces troubled. Her stomach sank. Here it came. The boycott, the financial ruin, the consequences of her choices. But Sarah Murphy stepped forward, twisting her hands nervously. Mrs. Whitlock, we wanted to talk to you before the morning rush. All right. Clara unlocked the door, her fingers trembling slightly. Come in. The 4 women filed inside, Sarah Murphy, whose husband ran the feed store, Helen Wade, the school teacher, young Alice Cooper, who worked at the general store, and Catherine Mills, the doctor's wife. They stood in an awkward cluster, none of them meeting Clara's eyes, until finally Helen spoke. We heard what Rebecca Morrison said to you yesterday, and we wanted you to know. She paused, gathering courage. We wanted you to know that not everyone in Red Hollow agrees with her. Clara's breath caught. You don't? Of course not, Catherine said firmly. She was older than the others, perhaps 60, with iron gray hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of a woman who'd spent 40 years married to a frontier doctor. Rebecca Morrison has been the self-appointed moral guardian of this town for too long. Frankly, I'm tired of it. But what I did... What did you do? Sarah interrupted. Took measurements at a customer's house? Spent time with a respectable man? Since when is that a crime? We're not saying everyone will feel this way, Alice added quickly. Her voice was soft, uncertain, but her eyes were determined. Some people are, well, they're already choosing sides. But we wanted you to know you have friends, people who think you deserve happiness. The relief was so intense, Clara had to sit down. I thought everyone would turn against me. Some will, Helen said honestly. But some of us remember what it's like to be judged for things that aren't anyone else's business. I lost my teaching position in Kansas because I refused to marry the school board president's son. Came here to start over. She smiled slightly. I understand the cost of choosing yourself. They stayed for almost an hour, these 4 women who were quietly, carefully defying Red Hollow's social order by supporting Clara's choice. It wasn't much, 4 allies in a town of 300, but it was something. It was enough to keep fighting. After they left, Clara sat at her sewing table and cried. Not from despair this time, but from gratitude. She wasn't alone. Not completely. The rest of the week brought a strange division in Red Hollow. The town split into clear factions, those who condemned Clara's relationship with Ethan, and those who quietly supported it. The condemners were louder, more visible, led by Rebecca Morrison and the Ladies' Church Guild, but the supporters were steadier, more loyal. Clara lost customers. That was undeniable. Mrs. Eleanor Winters took her business to Coopersville. So did the mayor's wife, and half a dozen other prominent women. Clara's income dropped by nearly 40% in 1 week. But she also gained customers. Women from the outskirts of town who'd never felt comfortable with Red Hollow's social elite. Younger women who saw in Clara's defiance a kind of courage they aspired to. Even a few men, sheepishly bringing their wives mending with mumbled explanations about supporting local business. It wasn't enough to replace what she'd lost. Not yet. But it was something. Ethan made good on his promise to court her properly. He took her to dinner at the hotel restaurant on Wednesday evening, walking her through the main street in broad daylight with her hand on his arm. Every eye in town followed them. Clara held her head high and smiled at the whispers. On Saturday, he drove her to the church social, an act of either supreme courage or complete foolishness. The moment they arrived, silence fell like a curtain dropping. Rebecca Morrison stood near the refreshment table, surrounded by her usual coterie of followers. Her eyes narrowed as Clara and Ethan approached. "Well," Rebecca said loudly enough for half the room to hear, "I'm surprised you had the nerve to show your face here, Clara." Clara felt Ethan tense beside her, but she touched his arm gently. This was her fight. "Why wouldn't I?" Clara asked calmly. "I've been a member of this community for 23 years. I've paid my dues, supported local businesses, attended every social function. I have as much right to be here as anyone." "Rights come with responsibilities," Rebecca shot back, "including the responsibility to behave in a manner befitting a respectable woman." "I am respectable." "You're a scandal. Carrying on with a man you barely know, flaunting your relationship in front of the entire town, setting a terrible example for the younger women." "I'm not carrying on," Clara said, her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest. "I'm courting, being courted, just like half the people in this room did before they married. The only difference is my age, and last I checked, there's no law against falling in love after 40. "Love?" Rebecca's laugh was cruel. "Is that what you're calling it? We all know what's really happening here. A lonely widow, desperate for male attention, throwing herself at the first man who shows her any interest. It's pathetic, Clara." The words landed like physical blows. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, felt shame and anger warring in her chest. But before she could respond, Catherine Mills stepped forward. "That's enough, Rebecca." Rebecca turned, startled. Catherine was her social equal in Red Hollow's hierarchy, married to the town doctor, well-respected, financially secure. Her opinion mattered in a way that Clara's, as a working widow, never quite could. "I beg your pardon?" Rebecca said icily. "I said that's enough. You've made your opinion clear, but you don't speak for all of us." Catherine's voice was calm but firm. "Some of us think Clara Whitlock is one of the finest women in this town. Hard-working, skilled, honest. If she's found happiness with Mr. Cross, that's cause for celebration, not condemnation. She's breaking every rule of decent society." "She's living her life," Helen Wade interjected, stepping up beside Catherine. "Something we should all be free to do without a jury of our neighbors passing judgment." The room had gone completely silent now, everyone watching the confrontation unfold. Clara stood frozen, hardly daring to believe what was happening. Sarah Murphy joined the growing group supporting Clara. Then Alice Cooper. Then, surprisingly, Martha Henderson, Rebecca Morrison's own sister-in-law. "I think we've been too harsh," Martha said quietly. "Clara's never done anything to hurt anyone. If she's found companionship, why should we begrudge her that?" Rebecca's face had gone red with fury and embarrassment. She looked around the room, clearly expecting support, but found only uncomfortable silence from most of the assembly. "Fine," she spat finally. "Support her if you want. But don't come crying to me when this all falls apart and she's left with nothing but her ruined reputation." She swept out of the social, taking only 2 or 3 of her closest allies with her. The door slammed behind them. In the aftermath, the room slowly came back to life. Conversations resumed, though quieter than before. People began to approach Clara, some to offer quiet words of support, others just to satisfy their curiosity about the man who'd caused such upheaval. Ethan handled it all with patient grace, answering questions about his ranch, his plans, his intentions toward Clara. He was honest and straightforward, and Clara watched several skeptical faces soften as they spoke with him. By the end of the evening, the battle lines had been drawn. Red Hollow was divided, but not as severely as Clara had feared, and more importantly, she wasn't standing alone. As Ethan drove her home that night, Clara felt something settle inside her. Not peace exactly, but a kind of resolution. This was going to be hard. There would be more confrontations, more judgment, more losses, but she could survive it. No, she could do more than survive it. She could thrive despite it. You were magnificent tonight, Ethan said softly, his hand finding hers in the darkness of the wagon. I was terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. He squeezed her fingers. You stood up to her, Clara. You didn't back down. I had help. You earned that help. Those women stood with you because they believe in you, because you've proven yourself worth standing with. Clara leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and soap and sun-warmed skin. What if Rebecca's right? What if this all falls apart? Then we'll pick up the pieces and start again. His arm came around her, solid and sure. But it won't fall apart, Clara. Not if we don't let it. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that love and determination could overcome social censure and financial pressure. But she'd lived long enough to know that the world didn't always reward courage. Still, sitting beside Ethan under a sky full of stars, his warmth steady against her side, Clara found herself hoping, really hoping, for the first time in 11 years. Maybe that was enough. The following weeks brought a new rhythm to Clara's life. She worked in her shop during the day, taking on whatever commissions came her way, fewer than before, but enough to keep her afloat. In the evenings, Ethan came to town, and they spent hours together, sometimes working on the curtains for his house, sometimes just talking. They talked about everything. Ethan's childhood in Montana, running wild with his brothers across endless grasslands. Claire's youth in Ohio, the daughter of a tailor who taught her to see the world in stitches and seams. Their respective marriages, the joys and sorrows, the might-have-beens and never-weres. Sarah was sweet, Ethan said one evening, his voice distant with memory. Gentle and kind. But we were so young. I'm not sure we really knew each other, not the way I'm getting to know you. Thomas was charming, Clara countered, full of big dreams and bigger promises, but he wasn't built for frontier life. Too soft, too optimistic. He thought everything would just work out because he wanted it to. Do you ever feel guilty? Ethan asked. About moving on? Clara considered the question carefully. Sometimes, but not the way I used to. I spent years feeling like being happy again would be a betrayal. Like I owed Thomas eternal grief. She paused. But I don't think he would have wanted that. He loved life too much to wish me a lifetime of mourning. Sarah would have wanted me to be happy too, Ethan said. I know that, but it took me a long time to believe I deserved it. And now? He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. Now I think maybe we both deserve another chance. They set a wedding date, 6 weeks away, in early November. It was fast by conventional standards, but neither of them saw the point in waiting. They'd both wasted enough time already. The announcement sent fresh ripples through Red Hollow. Some people were scandalized by the speed. Others grudgingly approved, viewing marriage as the proper conclusion to courtship, however unconventional the courtship had been. Clara threw herself into preparations with an intensity that surprised her. She designed her own wedding dress. Simple cream-colored wool, elegant but practical, suitable for a woman her age. She made new curtains for Ethan's house, transforming each room with careful attention to light and color. She packed up her belongings, sorting through 11 years of accumulated possessions and deciding what to keep, what to sell, what to leave behind. The shop was the hardest decision. She couldn't run a seamstress business from a ranch 8 miles outside of town, but the shop was her independence, her security, her identity for over a decade. Ethan never pressured her. Keep it if you want, he said when she raised the question. Hire someone to run it, or just hold on to it as a backup. Whatever makes you feel safe. But Clara didn't want a backup plan. Didn't want to keep one foot in her old life while trying to build a new one. That wasn't how you move forward. She sold the shop to young Alice Cooper, who'd been saving money for years to start her own business. The price was fair, and the knowledge that her shop, her life's work, would continue in capable hands eased the grief of letting go. 3 weeks before the wedding, Clara received an unexpected visitor. Rebecca Morrison appeared at her door one evening, looking uncomfortable and oddly diminished without her usual crowd of supporters. "May I come in?" Rebecca asked, her voice lacking its typical imperious edge. Clara stepped aside wordlessly. Rebecca entered, looking around the half-packed shop with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. "I heard you're selling to Alice Cooper." "I am." "She'll do well. She's got good instincts." Rebecca paused, seeming to gather herself. I wanted to apologize, Clara suggested, her voice dry. No. Rebecca's chin came up, a flash of her old defiance. I don't apologize for my principles. I still think you move too fast, that your behavior has been questionable. Then why are you here? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, almost vulnerable. Because I envy you. Clara stared at her, stunned. You what? I envy you, Rebecca repeated, not meeting Clara's eyes. Your courage, your freedom. I've been married to Harold for 26 years. He's a good man, a proper husband, but we've never had what you and Mr. Cross seem to have. That fire, that passion. She laughed bitterly. I don't even remember what passion feels like. For the first time, Clara saw past Rebecca's harsh exterior to the woman beneath, lonely, trapped in her own way, policing other women's behavior because she couldn't bear to examine her own life too closely. It's not too late, Clara said quietly, to find happiness, to change things. For you, maybe. You're a widow. You have freedom I'll never have. Rebecca finally looked at her. But I can stop making it harder for you. I won't apologize for what I said, but I won't say anything more against you either. You have my word on that. It wasn't the reconciliation Clara might have hoped for, but it was something, a truce at least. Thank you, Clara said simply. Rebecca nodded and turned to leave. At the door she paused. I hope you're happy, Clara. Truly. One of us should be. After she left, Clara stood in the quiet shop and thought about all the different kinds of prisons people built for themselves. Rebecca's was made of propriety and social expectation. Clara's had been made of grief and fear, but Clara had found the key to her cell, had walked out into uncertain freedom. She hoped Rebecca would find her own key someday. The final weeks before the wedding passed in a blur. Clara finished the last of her commissions, packed up her apartment, said goodbye to the shop that had been her sanctuary and her prison in equal measure. Ethan helped with everything, patient and steady, never complaining about the long evenings spent wrapping dishes in newspaper or the discussions about which furniture to keep and which to sell. He seemed to understand instinctively when Clara needed help and when she needed to do things herself, when to offer comfort and when to offer space. The night before the wedding, Margaret Chen came to help Clara pack the last few boxes. They worked in companionable silence for a while before Margaret spoke. You know what you're doing is important, don't you? Clara looked up from the linens she was folding. What do you mean? You're proving something. Showing the other women in this town, the widows, the spinsters, the ones who think their lives are over, that it's never too late, that they don't have to accept loneliness just because society says they should. I'm just living my life, Margaret. No, Margaret's voice was firm. You're changing the world, one choice at a time. It might not feel revolutionary, but it is. Every time you choose yourself, choose happiness, choose love, you make it easier for the next woman to do the same. Clara thought about that as she lay in her narrow bed for the last time that night. Was that what she was doing? Starting a revolution of late-blooming love and second chances? It felt too grand, too important for what was really just a widow and a rancher deciding to build a life together. But maybe Margaret was right. Maybe the personal was revolutionary. Maybe every woman who dared to want more, to reach for more, to demand more, was chipping away at the walls that confined them all. Clara fell asleep thinking about walls and keys and doors opening onto vast, uncertain, beautiful futures. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect November day, cold but not bitter, with a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Clara, dressed in her cream-colored wedding dress, pinned her hair up with her mother's pearl combs, and looked at herself in the mirror one last time. She was 46 years old. Her face was lined, her hands were worn, her figure was far from fashionable. But her eyes were bright with hope, and her smile was genuine. She was beautiful. The ceremony was small, held in Catherine Mills's parlor rather than the church, a compromise that allowed them to marry without requiring the participation of the more judgmental members of the community. Only about 20 people attended. Margaret Chen and the other women who'd stood by Clara, Ethan's ranch hands, a few of the men from town who'd come to respect Ethan's work ethic and honesty. It was perfect. Ethan stood waiting for her in Catherine's front room, looking nervous and proud in his best suit. When he saw Clara, his expression shifted to something so tender it made her breath catch. The The ceremony itself was brief, simple vows, simply spoken. But when Ethan slipped the plain gold band onto her finger and said, "I promise to honor you, protect you, and love you for all the days of my life," Clara felt something fundamental shift inside her. She was no longer alone, no longer invisible, no longer waiting for life to happen. She was living it. The small reception afterward was cheerful and warm. Catherine had prepared food, Margaret had brought her special tea, and someone had even procured a bottle of decent whiskey for toasts. People laughed and talked, and for a few hours, the scandal and judgment and struggle faded away, replaced by simple joy. As the sun began to set, Ethan and Clara climbed into his wagon, their wagon now, for the ride to the ranch. Their ranch, their home. Behind them, Red Hollow faded into the distance. Ahead, the vast frontier stretched endlessly, full of challenges and hardships and unknown trials. But they would face it together, and that made all the difference. The ranch house felt different as Clara crossed the threshold that first night as Ethan's wife. She'd been here before, had taken measurements and planned curtains and shared meals at this table. But now the space was hers, truly hers, and the weight of that reality settled over her like a cloak both heavy and warm. Ethan carried her single trunk inside, setting it down in the bedroom with a gentleness that made her heart ache. The cream curtain she'd made hung at the windows, catching the last light of day and turning it soft and golden. The room looked lived in now, welcoming in a way it hadn't been during her first visit all those weeks ago. "Are you all right?" Ethan asked, watching her with those steady gray eyes. Clara nodded, though her throat felt tight. It's strange. Good strange, but strange. I've lived alone for so long." "We'll take it slow." He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "There's no rush, Clara. We have time." But Clara didn't want slow, didn't want careful. She'd been careful for 11 years, and it had nearly killed something essential inside her. So instead of stepping back, she stepped forward, rising on her toes to kiss him with all the pent-up longing and hope and fear she'd been carrying. Ethan responded immediately, his arms coming around her, pulling her close. The kiss deepened, turned hungry, became something that had been building between them since that first afternoon in her shop, when a weathered rancher had walked through her door and seen her, really seen her, for the first time in over a decade. That night, Clara learned that bodies didn't forget, even after years of disuse. Learned that desire didn't diminish with age, but could grow richer, more complex, layered with understanding and gratitude that youth never possessed. Learned that coming alive again hurt in the best possible way. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Ethan's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. "What's wrong?" Ethan's voice was rough with concern. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's—" She struggled to find words. "I'd forgotten what this felt like. Being held, being wanted. I thought I'd lost it forever." His arms tightened around her. "You'll never lose it again. I promise you that." Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this happiness was real and lasting, not just a brief reprieve before the universe took it away again, like it had taken Thomas, like it had taken her dreams of children and family, and a life filled with more than just survival. But the darkness whispered doubts. What if she wasn't strong enough for ranch life? What if Ethan eventually saw her the way Red Hollow did, as a desperate widow clinging to her last chance? What if this beautiful, fragile thing they'd built together shattered under the weight of reality? She fell asleep still wrestling with those fears, only to wake at dawn to the smell of coffee and the sound of Ethan moving quietly in the kitchen, trying not to disturb her. Clara lay still for a moment, absorbing the foreignness of it all. A man in her space. Morning sounds that weren't her own. The prospect of a day spent not in careful isolation but in partnership. She rose and dressed, then joined Ethan in the kitchen. He looked up from the stove where he was frying eggs, and his smile was so open, so genuinely happy to see her, that some of her nighttime doubts dissolved like frost in sunlight. "I was going to bring you breakfast in bed," he said. "I'm not much for lying about." Clara poured herself coffee, savoring the rich smell. "What needs doing today?" "Today?" Ethan slid eggs onto 2 plates. "Today, we rest. Tomorrow, the work begins." But Clara had never been good at resting. By noon, she'd reorganized the entire kitchen, finding more efficient placements for dishes and pans, discovering corners that needed scrubbing, making mental lists of improvements and additions. By mid-afternoon, she was examining the root cellar, calculating how much food they'd need to get through winter, wondering if she should start preserving vegetables even though the season was nearly over. Ethan found her there, covered in dust, inventorying potato sacks. "Clara." His voice held gentle amusement. "What are you doing?" "Planning. We'll need more root vegetables if we're going to make it through to spring. And this cellar needs better organization. The turnips shouldn't be stored with—" "Clara." He took her hand, tugging her up from her crouch. "Stop." "Stop what?" "Trying to prove yourself. You don't have to earn your place here. You already have it." The words hit harder than they should have. Clara felt her throat tighten. "I just want to be useful, to pull my weight." "You are useful. You're more than useful." Ethan brushed dust from her cheek. "But you're also my wife, not my hired hand. There's a difference." "I've never been anyone's wife without also being their worker," Clara said quietly. "Thomas needed me to run the shop, keep us fed, nurse him when he got sick. I don't know how to be just a wife." "Then we'll figure it out together." Ethan pulled her close, and Clara let herself lean into his strength. "But first you're going to come upstairs and let me wash that dust off you before you reorganize anything else." The gentleness in his voice undid her completely. She followed him upstairs, let him heat water and help her wash. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara let herself be cared for, instead of being the one doing the caring. The next morning brought reality crashing back. Ethan woke before dawn, as he did every morning, to tend the animals and check fences and handle the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch running. Clara woke with him, determined to be helpful, and quickly discovered that ranch work was nothing like running a seamstress shop. The chickens were aggressive, the cows were stubborn, and the horse they called Thunder had a mean streak that sent Clara stumbling backward into a water trough when she tried to approach him. She emerged soaked and frustrated, her carefully pinned hair falling in wet tangles around her face. Ethan's ranch hand, a taciturn man named Joe, who lived in the bunkhouse, watched her struggle with an expression that might have been sympathy or might have been suppressed laughter. "Thunder don't like sudden movements," Joe offered finally, his first words to her beyond a mumbled greeting at the wedding. "I noticed." Clara wrung water from her skirt, trying to salvage some dignity. "Takes time to learn the rhythms. Ranch ain't like town." It was the longest speech she'd heard from Joe, and Clara recognized it for what it was, kindness in his particular fashion. By midday, Clara was exhausted in a way she'd never experienced. Her back ached from hauling water, her hands were blistered from the unfamiliar work, and she'd developed a healthy respect for the sheer physical demands of frontier ranch life. But she didn't quit. She gritted her teeth and kept working, determined to prove she belonged here, that choosing this life hadn't been a mistake. Ethan found her in the barn that afternoon, struggling to move a heavy sack of feed. He took it from her without a word, lifted it easily, and set it where she'd been trying to place it. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Yes, I do." Clara wiped sweat from her forehead. "I'm not some delicate town lady who can't handle hard work." "I never said you were." "But there's a difference between helping and hurting yourself trying to prove something." "I'm not trying to prove anything." "Aren't you?" Ethan's expression was gentle but knowing. "Clara, you could spend the next month in bed reading books, and I'd still want you here. You don't have to earn your place with hard labor." "Then what do I do?" The question came out more desperate than she'd intended. "I don't know how to just exist, without purpose, without work that matters." "Your work does matter, but maybe not all of it has to be physical." He gestured toward the house. "Those curtains you made transformed that place. Made it feel like a home instead of just a shelter. That matters. The way you've reorganized the kitchen so everything's easier to find. That matters. The fact that you're here, that I get to come in from work and see you, talk to you, share meals with you, that matters more than anything." Clara wanted to believe him, but 46 years of proving her worth through productivity was hard to overcome in a few days. The following week brought their first real test. A late-season storm rolled in from the north, bringing freezing rain and wind that rattled the windows and found every crack in the house's defenses. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in 6 hours, and suddenly they were fighting not to improve the ranch, but to protect it. Ethan and Joe worked around the clock bringing the cattle into shelter, securing loose boards, checking on the most vulnerable animals. Clara did what she could, cooking hot meals at odd hours, keeping coffee ready, warming blankets by the fire for when the men came in half frozen. On the second night, one of the young calves got separated from its mother in the chaos. Ethan found it huddled against the barn, barely alive from exposure. He brought it into the kitchen and Clara immediately took over, rubbing the calf with warm towels, coaxing it to drink warmed milk, staying up all night to keep watch while Ethan caught a few hours of desperately needed sleep. The calf survived. When Ethan woke and found Clara still sitting on the kitchen floor, with the now sleeping animal curled against her, something in his expression made her breath catch. "You saved her," he said simply. "I just did what needed doing." "No." Ethan knelt beside her, his hand gentle on her cheek. "You cared. You fought for something small and helpless that most people wouldn't have bothered with. That's not just doing what needs doing. That's having a good heart." The words settled into Clara like seeds finding soil. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe her worth wasn't measured only in stitches sewn or tasks completed. Maybe just caring, just showing up, just being present was enough. The storm passed, leaving the ranch battered but intact. In its wake came a period of intense work as they repaired damage and prepared for winter's arrival. Clara found her rhythm gradually, learning to read the animals' moods, understanding the flow of ranch work, discovering which tasks suited her abilities and which were better left to Ethan and Joe. She took over the cooking entirely, finding satisfaction in feeding the men who worked so hard. She managed the household accounts, her years of running a business making her naturally skilled at tracking expenses and planning purchases. And she discovered an unexpected talent for animal husbandry, developing a gentle touch with the more skittish creatures that even Joe grudgingly admired. "You got away with them," Joe said one afternoon, watching Clara calm a nervous mare. "They trust you." It was high praise from the taciturn ranch hand, and Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest. But not everything was smooth. 6 weeks into their marriage, Clara made her first trip back to Red Hollow for supplies. Ethan offered to come with her, but she refused. She needed to prove to herself and to the town that she could hold her head high, that her choice hadn't broken her. The general store was crowded when she entered, and conversation stopped the moment she crossed the threshold. Clara felt every eye on her as she moved through the aisles, selecting flour and sugar and coffee, pretending not to notice the whispers. "Heard she's doing farm work now. Can you imagine? Probably regrets it already, stuck out there with nothing but cows, and give it 6 months before she's back in town, begging for her old shop." Clara paid for her purchases with steady hands, thanked Mr. Cooper politely, and turned to leave, only to find Rebecca Morrison blocking her path. For a long moment, the two women simply looked at each other. Clara braced for confrontation, for fresh judgment, for Rebecca's particular brand of cutting observations. Instead, Rebecca stepped aside. "Mrs. Cross," she said, her voice neutral but not hostile. "Mrs. Morrison?" Clara inclined her head slightly. It wasn't friendship, it wasn't even forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement, a kind of grudging respect. Clara would take it. Outside, she loaded her purchases into the wagon and was preparing to leave when Catherine Mills appeared, slightly out of breath. "Clara, I was hoping to catch you." Catherine pressed a wrapped bundle into her hands. "Just some preserves and bread. Thought you might need them." "Catherine, you didn't have to." "I know, I wanted to." Catherine's smile was warm. "How are you?" "Really?" Clara thought about lying, about putting on a brave face and pretending everything was perfect. But this was Catherine, who'd stood up for her when it mattered most. "It's hard," Clara admitted. "Harder than I expected. But also better. I'm happy, Catherine. Genuinely happy. I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again." "Good." Catherine squeezed her arm. "You deserve it. And don't let the gossips get to you. They'll find someone else to talk about soon enough." The kindness fortified Clara for the ride home. She arrived at the ranch to find Ethan waiting, his face creased with worry that smoothed into relief when he saw her. "How was it?" he asked, helping her down from the wagon. "Survivable." Clara leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "They're still talking, but I don't care as much as I thought I would." "That's my girl." He kissed her forehead. "Let them talk. We know the truth." That night, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Clara felt something settle inside her. This was her life now. Not perfect, not easy, but hers. Built on her own choices, sustained by her own strength and Ethan's partnership. She was no longer invisible, no longer waiting, no longer half alive. She was Clara Cross, ranch wife, and she was exactly where she belonged. Winter came hard that year, blanketing the prairie in snow that stretched to the horizon like a vast white ocean. The ranch became an isolated island, cut off from town for days at a time, when storms made the roads impassable. Clara had never experienced such isolation. Even in her loneliest years, she'd been surrounded by the noise and activity of town. Now there was only wind, snow, and the three of them, her, Ethan, and Joe, who took his meals in the main house during the worst of the weather. The forced intimacy could have been stifling. Instead, Clara found it oddly peaceful. They fell into routines, developed small rituals. Joe taught her to play cards on long evenings when the wind howled outside. Ethan read aloud from the few books they owned, his rough voice stumbling over unfamiliar words but determined to share the stories. Clara mended and sewed, creating new clothes for all of them, discovering satisfaction in the practical application of her skills. On the darkest nights, when the cold was so intense it made the house creak and groan, Clara would lie awake beside Ethan and wonder at the strangeness of her new life. 6 months ago, she'd been certain her story was finished. Now she was living a completely different narrative, one she couldn't have imagined even in her most desperate dreams. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked one such night, his voice rough with sleep. "That I'm happy," Clara said, surprised by the truth of it. That despite everything, the hardship, the isolation, the work, I'm genuinely happy. Good. He pulled her closer. Because I can't imagine doing this without you anymore. January brought a crisis that tested everything Clara had learned. A particularly vicious storm trapped them in the house for nearly a week. On the 5th day, Joe developed a fever that spiked alarmingly high. Without access to town or the doctor, Clara and Ethan could only do what frontier people had done for generations. Fight with whatever tools they had. Clara drew on memories of nursing Thomas through his final illness, of tending sick neighbors, of every scrap of medical knowledge she'd accumulated over 46 years of life. She brewed willow bark tea for the fever, made poultices for Joe's chest when his breathing grew labored, stayed up through the night sponging him with cool water when his temperature climbed to dangerous levels. Ethan helped, following her instructions without question, trusting her judgment even when the situation looked dire. And slowly, incrementally, Joe began to improve. The fever broke on the 7th day, and by the time the storm finally cleared enough for them to contemplate making the trip to town, Joe was sitting up and demanding real food. "You saved my life," Joe said to Clara, his voice still weak but sincere. "I just did what needed doing," Clara replied, echoing her earlier words about the calf. But Ethan, standing in the doorway, shook his head. "You did more than that. You were brilliant. Calm under pressure, you knew exactly what to do." Later, after Joe had fallen into natural sleep and they were finally alone, Ethan pulled Clara into his arms. "I was terrified," he admitted. "When his fever wouldn't break, when he started struggling to breathe, thought we were going to lose him. So was I." Clara's voice trembled with the admission. "But I couldn't let the fear win. He needed me to be strong." "You were. You are." Ethan's arms tightened around her. "You're the strongest person I know, Clara Cross." The words healed something in Clara she hadn't known was wounded. For so long she'd equated strength with invisibility, with silent endurance, with never asking for help or admitting weakness. But this was different. This was strength born from action, from caring, from refusing to give up even when the outcome was uncertain. This was real strength, and she possessed it. Spring arrived gradually, sneaking in through melting snow and muddy roads, and the first tentative green shoots pushing through frozen ground. With the thaw came renewed contact with Red Hollow, and with it, news both good and troubling. Alice Cooper, who'd bought Clara's old shop, was struggling. Her skills were good, but not exceptional, and several of Clara's former customers had drifted back to her, only to find the quality they'd grown accustomed to was no longer available. Business was suffering. Clara heard this from Catherine Mills during a rare visit to town in late March. Catherine spoke carefully, watching Clara's reaction. "Alice asked me to tell you she'd be grateful for any advice you could offer," Catherine said. "She doesn't want to fail, but she's in over her head." Clara's first instinct was satisfaction. A petty, human reaction to the knowledge that she was missed, that her skills had value beyond what Red Hollow had acknowledged. But the satisfaction faded quickly, replaced by genuine concern. Alice was young, barely 23, with more enthusiasm than experience. She'd taken on the shop because she'd needed the opportunity, not because she was fully prepared for it. "I'll talk to her," Clara heard herself say. Catherine's relief was visible. "Thank you. She's too proud to ask directly, but I know she'd appreciate it." The next day, Clara rode into town and found Alice in the shop. Her shop, though it didn't feel like hers anymore. The space had changed subtly, reorganized to suit Alice's preferences, but the bones were still familiar. Alice looked up from the dress she was hemming, and her expression cycled through surprise, embarrassment, and hope in rapid succession. "Mrs. Cross, I wasn't expecting you. Catherine said you might need some help." Clara set down her bag. "May I see what you're working on?" What followed was a strange, bittersweet afternoon. Clara walked Alice through advanced techniques, explained shortcuts she'd learned over decades of practice, offered advice on managing difficult customers and pricing work fairly. Alice absorbed everything like parched ground soaking up rain, asking questions, taking notes, visibly growing in confidence. "Why are you helping me?" Alice asked finally. "I bought your shop, took your customers. I'd understand if you hated me." "I don't hate you," Clara smiled. "I was you once. Young, scared, trying to build something from nothing. Someone helped me then. An old seamstress in Ohio who taught me half of what I know. I'm just passing it forward." But more than that, Clara realized, she was letting go. The shop wasn't hers anymore, and that was all right. She had a different life now, different challenges, different sources of satisfaction. She could share her knowledge without needing to reclaim her old identity. She was free. Over the following weeks, Clara established a new pattern. She'd visit town once a week, spend a few hours with Alice, then return to the ranch. It gave her a connection to her old skills without sacrificing her new life. And unexpectedly, it gave her something else: respect. The women of Red Hollow watched Clara mentor Alice with grudging approval. Here was proof that Clara's move to the ranch hadn't been about abandoning her responsibilities or running away from her old life. She was still contributing, still caring about the community, just in a different way. Even Rebecca Morrison softened slightly, stopping Clara on the street one day to acknowledge, "What you're doing for Alice is decent of you." It wasn't much, but it was something. May brought new life to the ranch in the form of spring calves and foals and the endless, exhausting work of planting. Clara threw herself into it, discovering muscles she didn't know she had and an unexpected love for the smell of fresh-turned earth. She also discovered she had a gift for gardening. The kitchen garden she planted flourished under her care, producing vegetables in abundance. She expanded it, adding herbs and flowers, creating a small oasis of color and growth beside the weathered ranch house. Ethan watched her work with something like wonder. "My mother would have loved you," he said one evening, finding her in the garden as the sun set. "She always said you could measure a woman's heart by what she could make grow." Clara looked around at the neat rows of plants, the carefully tended beds, the riot of wildflowers she'd transplanted from the prairie. "It's not much. It's everything." Ethan pulled her to her feet, dirt-stained and sweaty as she was, and kissed her thoroughly. "You've made this place a home, Clara. A real home." That night, lying in bed with the window open to let in the cool spring air, Clara thought about home and what it meant. For so long, home had been a small apartment above a shop, a space that was hers but never truly welcoming. Now home was this rambling ranch house, these wide-open spaces, this partnership with a man who saw her as essential rather than convenient. Home was wherever she and Ethan built it together. June brought unexpected visitors. A young couple traveling west to seek their fortune stopped at the ranch, looking for work and shelter. The man, James, was barely 22, his wife Sarah even younger. They were broke, hungry, and clearly in over their heads. Clara saw herself in Sarah's desperate eyes, that mixture of hope and terror, determination and doubt. She looked at Ethan and knew without words that they were in agreement. "We can offer you work," Ethan told James. "Room in the bunkhouse, meals, fair wages. It'll be hard labor, but it's honest." The relief on the young couple's faces was almost painful to witness. James proved to be a hard worker, if inexperienced. Sarah was shy and uncertain, clearly overwhelmed by frontier life. Clara took her under wing the way she'd mentored Alice, teaching her practical skills. Cooking on a wood stove, preserving food, managing a household on limited resources. "How do you do it?" Sarah asked one afternoon as they worked together in the kitchen. "How do you stay so calm? Everything here is so hard, so different from what I expected." Clara thought about her answer carefully. "I spent a long time being afraid," she said finally. "Afraid of failing, afraid of being judged, afraid of wanting too much. And that fear nearly killed me. Not literally, but it killed the part of me that knew how to hope." She met Sarah's eyes. "So now I try to be brave instead, even when I'm scared. Especially when I'm scared." Sarah absorbed this, her young face serious. "You're the bravest person I've ever met." The words caught Clara off guard. Brave? Her? The woman who'd spent 11 years hiding from life? But maybe that's what bravery was. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. The choice to keep trying even when the outcome was uncertain. The choice to live. July brought scorching heat that baked the prairie and tested everyone's endurance. Clara learned to work in the early morning and late evening, resting through the brutal midday hours. She learned to conserve water, to protect the garden from the merciless sun, to watch for signs of heat exhaustion in the animals and people. She also learned that marriage wasn't always easy. The heat made everyone irritable, and she and Ethan had their first real fight over something stupid, whether to buy new equipment or save the money for winter reserves. It escalated quickly, both of them exhausted and stressed, until Clara found herself saying things she didn't mean, and Ethan stormed out of the house. She sat in the sudden silence, shaking with anger and hurt and fear. Was this it? Was this the beginning of the end? Had she been foolish to think they could make this work? But Ethan returned an hour later, his anger cooled. He found Clara in his garden, tears streaking through the dirt on her face, and immediately dropped to his knees beside her. "I'm sorry," he said. "You were right. We should save the money. I was just frustrated. Took it out on you." "I'm sorry too." Clara's voice trembled. "I said terrible things. I didn't mean them." "I know." He pulled her into his arms, and they sat there in the dirt, holding each other. "We're going to fight sometimes, Clara. We're both stubborn as hell. But fighting doesn't mean failing. It just means we're both invested enough to care." The reassurance steadied her. They were learning each other, learning how to navigate disagreements and stress, and the thousand small frictions of shared life. It wasn't always pretty, but it was real. And real was what Clara had been missing for so long. As summer faded into early autumn, Clara realized she'd been at the ranch for nearly a year. A full cycle of seasons, of growth and change and challenge. She stood in her garden one September morning, harvesting the last of the tomatoes, and took stock of her transformation. She was stronger now, physically. Her arms had muscle, her hands were calloused from work rather than just sewing. Her face was tanned, her hair sun-streaked. She looked like a ranch wife, not a town seamstress. But the changes went deeper than appearance. She was more confident, more certain of her place and purpose. She could read weather signs, calm a nervous horse, diagnose common livestock ailments. She could manage a household, stretch a dollar, make something from nothing. She'd become the woman she was always meant to be. That evening, as she and Ethan sat on the porch watching the sunset, Clara said, "I've been thinking." About? About expanding, not the ranch, the house, adding on a room or two. She paused, gathering courage, in case we ever need them. Ethan turned to look at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I'm 47 years old, probably too old to have children of my own, but there are other ways to build a family." She met his gaze steadily. James and Sarah won't stay forever. They're young, ambitious. They'll move on eventually. But there are always people who need help. Kids who need homes. We have space, resources, love to give. I thought maybe... She trailed off, uncertain, but Ethan's smile stopped her doubts. "I think that's the best idea I've heard in years," he said quietly. "Yes. Let's build those rooms. Let's build a family." And just like that, their future expanded again, stretching into new possibilities Clara hadn't dared imagine. Construction on the new rooms began in early October, when the brutal summer heat had finally broken and the air carried the first hints of autumn's crispness. Ethan and Joe worked on the addition whenever ranch duties allowed, and Clara found herself drawn to watch their progress, imagining the lives that might one day fill those spaces. She didn't have to imagine for long. The letter arrived on a gray November morning, delivered by the mail rider who made the circuit between Red Hollow and the surrounding ranches twice a month. It was from Catherine Mills, and Clara's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The words were brief and to the point, as Catherine's usually were. A situation had developed in town. A young girl, perhaps 9 or 10 years old, whose father had died in a mining accident and whose mother had succumbed to pneumonia 2 weeks later. The child had no other family, no one to take her in. The county was preparing to send her to an orphanage in the territorial capital, a journey that would take her hundreds of miles from the only home she'd ever known. Catherine's final lines were simple. Her name is Lily. She's frightened and grieving and trying very hard to be brave. I thought of you immediately. If you and Ethan are serious about what you mentioned, this child needs you now. Clara read the letter 3 times, her heart pounding harder with each pass. This was real. Not a distant possibility or a someday dream, but an actual child who needed a home. Needed them. She found Ethan in the barn, repairing a section of fence that had been damaged in the last windstorm. He looked up as she approached, and whatever he saw in her face made him set down his tools immediately. What's wrong? Clara handed him the letter wordlessly. She watched his expression shift as he read. Surprise, then understanding, then something that looked like hope mixed with fear. A child, he said quietly. A girl, 9 or 10 years old, orphaned. Clara's voice shook. Catherine thinks we should take her. What do you think? It was such an Ethan question, not telling her what to do, not making the decision for her, but trusting her judgment. Clara had spent 11 years as a widow where no one asked her opinion on anything important, and 2 years before that with a husband who'd loved her but rarely consulted her. This partnership of equals still felt new and precious. I think I'm terrified, Clara admitted. I've never raised a child. Don't know the first thing about it. What if I fail her? What if I'm not enough? Ethan crossed to her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. You saved Joe's life with nothing but determination and herbs. You've built a garden that feeds us through winter. You took a lonely ranch house and made it a home. You mentor Alice and Sarah and every person who needs help. He paused. You're more than enough, Clara. You always have been. The words steadied her, gave her courage. The rooms aren't finished. They're close enough, we can make do. People will talk. They'll say we're too old, that we don't know what we're doing. People always talk. Ethan's smile was soft. Are we going to let that stop us? Clara thought about that girl, Lily, alone and scared, facing a journey to an orphanage where she'd be one of dozens, where she might never know a real home again. She thought about her own lost dreams of children, of the family she'd thought she'd never have. No, she said firmly. We're not going to let anything stop us. Let's go get our daughter. They rode into Red Hollow the next morning, arriving at Catherine's house before noon. Catherine answered the door with visible relief, ushering them inside quickly. She's in the spare room, Catherine said quietly. Fair warning, she hasn't spoken much since her mother died. The doctor thinks it's shock, grief. She'll come out of it eventually, but right now she's fragile. Clara's heart clenched. She knew fragile. Had been fragile herself not so long ago. The girl sitting on Catherine's spare bed was small for her age, with dark hair that hung in tangled curtains around a thin face. Her eyes were enormous, light brown, almost amber, and held a wariness that made Clara's chest ache. This was a child who'd learned too young that the world was unsafe, that people you loved could disappear without warning. Lily, Catherine said gently, these are the people I told you about. Mr. and Mrs. Cross. They have a ranch outside town, and they'd like you to come live with them. Lily's eyes moved to Clara and Ethan, assessing them with a gravity no child should possess. She said nothing. Clara knelt slowly, bringing herself to the girl's eye level. Hello, Lily. My name is Clara. This is Ethan. She paused, searching for the right words. I know you've lost people you love. I know everything probably feels scary and wrong right now. I can't promise to replace your parents. No one could do that. But I can promise you a home, a safe place, people who will care about you and protect you. Still nothing. But something in Lily's expression shifted slightly, became less defensive. "We have a ranch," Clara continued, "with horses and cows and chickens. I have a garden that needs help come spring, and we're building new rooms onto the house. One of them could be yours if you want it. Your own space." Lily's gaze moved to Ethan, evaluating him with that same unsettling intensity. Ethan remained still, patient, letting the girl look her fill. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, Lily spoke. "Do you have a dog?" The question caught Clara off guard. "No, but we could get one. Would you like that?" The smallest nod. Then, even quieter, "Mama said maybe we could get a dog someday, but she got sick before—" The girl's voice broke. She didn't cry. Clara suspected she'd cried herself dry already, but her thin shoulders shook. Clara moved without thinking, crossing the space between them and pulling Lily into her arms. The girl stiffened for a moment, then collapsed against Clara like a puppet with cut strings, her small body trembling with silent grief. "It's all right," Clara murmured, rocking her gently. "It's all right to be sad. It's all right to miss them. You don't have to be brave all the time." They stayed like that for a long time, Clara holding this broken child, Ethan standing quiet guardian, Catherine watching with tears in her eyes. When Lily finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and her eyes were red, but something in her expression had softened. "Can I really have my own room?" she asked. "Absolutely," Ethan said, his voice gentle. "And we'll get you a dog. A good one. Your choice." Lily looked between them, and Clara saw the moment the girl made her decision. It was visible in the slight relaxation of her shoulders, the way her guard dropped just a fraction. "Okay," Lily whispered. "I'll come with you." The ride back to the ranch was quiet but not uncomfortable. Lily sat between Clara and Ethan on the wagon seat, clutching a small bundle of belongings, everything she owned in the world, wrapped in a worn quilt. Clara kept one arm around the girl's shoulders, feeling her trembling despite the warm blankets they'd wrapped her in. When the ranch house came into view, Lily sat up straighter, her eyes widening. "This is home," Clara said simply. Joe met them in the yard, his weathered face creasing with surprise when he saw the child. But being Joe, he simply nodded and said, "I'll see to the horses," leaving them to handle the more complicated matters. Sarah, however, came rushing out of the bunkhouse, her young face alight with curiosity and warmth. "Oh, you brought someone home!" Lily shrank against Clara, overwhelmed by the enthusiasm. Clara placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "This is Lily," Clara said firmly. "She's going to be living with us. Lily, this is Sarah, and that's Joe. They work on the ranch. They're good people." Sarah, reading the situation more astutely than Clara had given her credit for, softened her approach. "Welcome, Lily. I hope you'll be happy here." Getting Lily settled took the rest of the afternoon. Her room wasn't quite finished. The walls were up, but not painted. The floor still bare wood. But Clara had brought quilts from town and made up a bed with clean sheets and soft blankets. They unpacked Lily's meager belongings, finding spaces for a few dresses, a worn doll, a book of fairy tales. "My mama used to read to me from this," Lily said, touching the book with reverent fingers, "every night before bed." "Would you like me to read to you?" Clara offered. "I'm not your mama, but I do know how to read stories." Lily considered this gravely. "Maybe. Not tonight, but maybe tomorrow." It was a small opening, but Clara took it as the gift it was. That first night was difficult. Lily woke screaming from nightmares twice, and both times Clara rushed to her room to find the girl sobbing and disoriented. She held Lily until the tears subsided, murmuring comfort, reminding her where she was and that she was safe. The third time, Ethan came with her. They sat on either side of Lily's bed like sentinels, and gradually the girl's breathing evened out and she slept again. "This is going to be hard," Ethan said quietly as they returned to their own room. "Yes." Clara slipped her hand into his. "But we can do hard things." The next weeks were an exercise in patience and adaptation. Lily was grieving, traumatized, struggling to trust this new situation. She barely spoke, picked at her food, flinched at sudden movements. She watched Clara and Ethan constantly, as if expecting them to disappear or change into something threatening. Clara drew on every reserve of patience she possessed. She kept routines predictable, movements gentle, voices calm. She didn't force Lily to talk but left spaces for conversation. She cooked the girls' favorite foods, Catherine had provided a list, and slowly, gradually, Lily began to eat more. Ethan proved unexpectedly good with the traumatized child. He seemed to understand instinctively that Lily needed space and steadiness more than affection right now. He spoke to her like an adult, never condescending, always honest. When Lily asked difficult questions, "Why did my mama have to die? What if you die too?" He answered truthfully but gently, never minimizing her fears. "People do die," he told her one evening. "That's true, and it's scary, but most people live for a long time. Your mama getting sick was terrible and unfair, but it wasn't common. Clara and I are healthy and strong. We plan to be around for many, many years." "But you can't promise," Lily pressed. "No," Ethan admitted. "I can't promise. Life doesn't work that way. But I can promise that while we're here, we'll take care of you. We'll keep you safe. We'll love you. That's a promise I can keep." The honesty seemed to comfort Lily more than platitudes would have. She nodded slowly, processing this, and some of the fear in her eyes eased. 2 weeks after Lily's arrival, they made good on their promise about the dog. They rode into Red Hollow together, Clara, Ethan, and Lily, to see a litter of puppies old Tom Peterson's dog had birthed. Tom led them to the barn where 6 squirming, yipping balls of fur tumbled over each other. Lily's face lit up with the first genuine joy Clara had seen from her. She dropped to her knees, and immediately the puppies swarmed her, licking and nipping and climbing into her lap. She laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was like sun breaking through clouds. "Which one do you like?" Clara asked. Lily's hands moved over the puppies with careful attention. She picked up each one, examined it, set it down gently. Finally, she lifted a small female with brown and white markings and ears that flopped endearingly. "This one," she said. "She's the smallest. The others push her around. I think she needs someone to protect her." Clara's throat tightened. Of course, Lily would choose the vulnerable one, would see herself in the runt of the litter. "What will you name her?" Ethan asked. Lily thought for a long moment. "Hope. I'll call her Hope." They brought Hope home, and the puppy became Lily's constant companion. She slept curled at the foot of Lily's bed, followed her everywhere during the day, and seemed to sense when the girl needed comfort. On the bad nights when Lily woke crying, Hope would whine and lick her face until the tears stopped. The dog was better medicine than anything Clara could have provided. November turned to December, and preparations for winter began in earnest. Clara taught Lily to help with food preservation, showing her how to store root vegetables and canned preserves. The work was good for the girl. It gave her purpose, kept her hands busy, provided a sense of contributing to the household. "My mama used to do this," Lily said one afternoon, carefully packing carrots into sand for winter storage. "She taught me to help." "Your mama was smart," Clara said. "These are important skills. You're doing excellent work." Lily glowed under the praise, and Clara made a mental note to offer more of it. This child had been through enough. She deserved to know she was valued. Christmas approached, and Clara found herself planning with an enthusiasm she hadn't felt in years. Their first Christmas as a family. The word still felt strange, but increasingly right. She enlisted Sarah's help making decorations, teaching Lily how to cut paper snowflakes and string popcorn. Ethan and Joe brought in a small pine tree, and they spent an evening decorating it with their handmade ornaments. Lily approached the festivities with cautious hope, as if afraid to be too happy, afraid it might be taken away. But gradually, as the days passed and the preparations continued, she allowed herself to relax into it. On Christmas Eve, they gathered in the main room: Clara, Ethan, Lily, Joe, James, and Sarah. It was an odd little family, assembled from strays and misfits and people who'd found each other against all odds. But it was theirs. Clara had made gifts for everyone. New shirts for the men, warm shawls for Sarah. For Lily, she'd sewn a beautiful new dress in deep blue with careful embroidery at the collar, work that had taken her weeks of secret evenings sewing. When Lily unwrapped it, her eyes went wide. "For me?" "For you. I thought you might like something special." Lily held the dress against herself, and tears spilled down her cheeks, but they weren't sad tears this time. "No one ever made me something this beautiful," she whispered. Can I call you Mama? The question hung in the air, fragile and precious. Clara felt Ethan's hand find hers, squeezing gently. I would be honored, Clara said, her voice breaking. If you'd like to. Lily launched herself into Clara's arms with a force that nearly knocked her over. Thank you, Mama. Thank you for keeping me. Clara held her daughter, because that's what Lily was now, in every way that mattered, and cried. Ethan's arms came around both of them, and for a long moment they just stood there, this new family, binding itself together through love and choice and the courage to hope. The winter that followed was harsh, but they weathered it together. Lily grew stronger, more confident, started speaking more freely. She helped with chores, played with hope, began to laugh more often than she cried. The nightmares came less frequently, and when they did, she knew she was safe. In February, another letter arrived from Catherine. A situation in the next county over. Twin boys, age 7, orphaned when their parents' wagon overturned crossing a swollen river. No family, nowhere to go. Clara and Ethan read the letter together in the kitchen while Lily was out playing with Hope in the snow. Twin boys, Clara said slowly. That's a lot to take on. It is. Ethan looked at her carefully. What do you think? Clara thought about their growing family, about the rooms they'd built, about the love they had to give. She thought about how Lily had blossomed here, how the frightened, silent girl had transformed into someone who laughed and played and trusted. I think we should meet them, she said. See if it feels right. The boys arrived 2 weeks later. Danny and David, identical twins with red hair and freckles and matching expressions of wary defiance. They'd been bounced between temporary homes for 3 months, and it showed in their distrust and defensive posturing. But Lily, now comfortable in her own place in the family, took charge immediately. She showed them the ranch, introduced them to Hope, explained the rules and routines with the authority of someone who'd been there much longer than 3 months. Mama and Papa are nice, she told them seriously. They don't yell, and they don't hit, and they keep their promises. And if you have bad dreams, Mama will come. She always comes. The twins tested boundaries constantly those first weeks. They fought with each other, talked back, broke rules deliberately to see what would happen. Clara and Ethan held firm, consistent consequences, clear expectations, but also patience and understanding. They're scared, Clara explained to Ethan after a particularly difficult day. They've lost everyone. They think if they're bad enough, we'll send them away like everyone else did, so they're trying to make it happen on their terms. How do we show them we're not everyone else? We stay. We keep showing up. We prove through action that our love isn't conditional. It took time, but gradually the boys began to settle. They bonded with Joe, who taught them ranch work with gruff patience. They adored Ethan, following him around and copying his mannerisms. And slowly, tentatively, they started to trust Clara, testing her limits and finding them solid. By spring, the Cross Ranch had transformed. What had started as a quiet home for 2 had become a noisy, chaotic household of 5. 3 children, 2 adults, and assorted ranch hands who'd become extended family. The addition was finally complete, giving each child their own room, and plans were already underway for further expansion. Clara stood in her garden one April morning, watching Lily teach the twins how to plant seeds, and marveled at how completely her life had changed. 2 years ago, she'd been the invisible widow, existing in the margins, certain her story was over. Now she was mother to 3, wife to a man who saw her as an equal partner, mentor to young women in town, and living proof that it was never too late to begin again. The work was endless. The challenges were constant. There were days when she was so exhausted she could barely stand, days when the children pushed every boundary, days when money was tight and winter was coming, and she wondered how they'd manage. But there was also laughter, joy, purpose, love so abundant it spilled over into everything they did. One evening in late May, after the children were finally in bed and the house was quiet, Clara sat on the porch with Ethan, watching the stars emerge. Do you ever regret it? Ethan asked quietly. Taking on so much, 3 children, a ranch, all the responsibility? Clara thought about her answer carefully. Sometimes I miss the quiet, she admitted. The simplicity of my old life, but regret? Never. This chaos, this noise, this beautiful, exhausting mess, this is what I was meant for. I just didn't know it until you walked through my door and saw me. I saw you because you were always worth seeing, Ethan said. You just needed to believe it yourself. Maybe we saved each other, Clara suggested. Maybe we did. Summer brought new challenges and new joys. The children thrived on the ranch, growing brown and strong from sun and work. Lily had become a skilled gardener, taking pride in the vegetables she coaxed from the earth. The twins had found their place working with the animals, showing a natural talent for handling even the most temperamental livestock. And gradually, Red Hollow's attitude toward the Cross family shifted. It was impossible to maintain judgment in the face of such obvious love and success. The children were well-fed, well-dressed, happy. The ranch was prosperous. Clara and Ethan worked as true partners, their respect and affection for each other visible to everyone who saw them. Even Rebecca Morrison softened completely. She stopped by the ranch one afternoon with preserves and a stiff but genuine apology. "I was wrong about you," Rebecca said. "About what you were doing, about your relationship with Ethan. I was bitter about my own life and I took it out on you. I'm sorry." Clara accepted the apology with grace. She understood bitterness, understood the way unfulfilled dreams could poison everything they touched. By autumn, the Cross Ranch had become a kind of legend in the territory. People spoke of the widow and the rancher who'd found love late and built a family from orphaned children. Other families dealing with tragedy began to reach out, asking if Clara and Ethan might take in just one more child who needed a home. They took in 2 more over the next year, a teenage girl named Emma, who'd aged out of the county orphanage with nowhere to go, and a boy of 5 named Thomas, named after Clara's first husband, who'd been abandoned at a trading post. The ranch house kept expanding. More rooms, more beds, more mouths to feed, more laughter, more tears, more life. Clara was 50 now, with silver threading heavily through her hair and lines carved deep around her eyes. Her hands were roughened by work. Her body bore the marks of hard labor. But she'd never felt more beautiful, more alive, more essential. She'd become what she'd always been meant to be, a mother, not through biology, but through choice, through opening her home and her heart to children who needed both. And in becoming a mother, she'd found herself. One evening, as she tucked Thomas into bed and listened to his prayers, the boy looked up at her with complete trust. "Are you going to keep me forever?" he asked. "Forever," Clara promised. "You're ours now, Thomas. Nothing will change that. Even if I'm bad sometimes? Even then. That's what family means. We stay, even when things are hard." The boy smiled and snuggled into his blankets, secure in a way he'd never been before. Clara kissed his forehead and left the room, her heart so full it ached. She found Ethan in their bedroom, looking out the window at the ranch they'd built together. He turned when she entered, and his smile was soft. "Another good day," he said. "Another good day," Clara agreed, moving into his arms. They stood together in the quiet, listening to the sounds of their full house, children settling into sleep, the creak of old wood, the distant sound of cattle. This was their legacy, this loud, chaotic, beautiful family they'd assembled from broken pieces. This was proof that the heart didn't age, it endured, that it was never too late to begin again, that love, when it finally arrived, could transform everything. The years that followed were full in ways Clara had never imagined possible. The ranch became a kind of haven, known throughout the territory as a place where broken children could become whole again. Word spread through county offices and frontier towns. If a child had nowhere else to go, the Cross Ranch would take them in. Not every child stayed permanently. Some, like James and Sarah, who'd moved on after 2 years to start their own homestead, used the ranch as a stepping stone to independent lives. Others, like Lily and the twins and Emma and Thomas, sank roots so deep that leaving became unthinkable. The house kept expanding, room by room, year by year, until it sprawled across the hilltop like a small village unto itself. Clara was 53 when the letter arrived that would test everything they'd built. It came from the territorial governor's office, written in formal language that made her hands shake as she read it. There had been complaints, anonymous letters sent to county officials claiming that the Cross Ranch was operating outside proper legal channels, that children were being kept in unsafe conditions, that Clara and Ethan were unfit guardians due to their ages and lack of formal credentials. The governor was sending an inspector. They had 30 days to prepare for a full investigation that could result in the children being removed and placed in state-run institutions. Clara read the letter 3 times before her vision blurred with tears of rage and fear. After everything they'd done, everything they'd built, someone was trying to destroy it. Ethan found her in the kitchen. The letter crumpled in her fist, and his face went pale as she explained. "Who would do this?" he asked, his voice tight with anger. "Does it matter?" Clara's hands trembled. "They're coming. They could take the children, all of them." That evening, after the children were in bed, Clara and Ethan sat at the kitchen table and faced the reality of their situation. They'd built their family on love and determination, but they'd never formalized most of the arrangements. Some children had been placed with them through Catherine's intervention, others through informal agreements with desperate relatives or county officials. None of it was technically illegal, but it wasn't entirely proper either. "We need help," Ethan said finally. "Legal help, documentation. We need to show them that this isn't just us taking in strays. This is a real home, a real family." Clara thought of the children sleeping upstairs. Lily was 18 now, helping Clara manage the household and teaching the younger children. The twins were 15, strong and capable, already talking about someday running the ranch themselves. Emma was 17, engaged to a young rancher from the next county. Thomas was 8, thriving after years of patient love and stability. And there were 4 more. Children who'd arrived over the past 3 years, ranging from age 6 to 13. 9 children plus 3 who'd already aged out and moved on to their own lives. 12 lives transformed. 12 futures secured. She would not let someone take that away based on anonymous complaints and bureaucratic requirements. "We fight," Clara said, her voice hardening with determination. "We show them exactly what we've built here. We gather testimonials, documentation, proof that these children are better off with us than they'd be anywhere else, and we dare them to say otherwise." The next 30 days were a whirlwind of preparation. Catherine Mills proved invaluable, using her connections to help them navigate the legal requirements. She contacted every official who'd ever placed a child with them, securing written statements attesting to the quality of care provided. She reached out to the 3 young adults who'd lived with the Crosses and moved on, asking them to testify on Clara and Ethan's behalf. Alice Cooper, who now ran the most successful seamstress shop in the territory, wrote a glowing letter about Clara's character and capabilities. Even Rebecca Morrison, surprising everyone including herself, submitted a statement declaring the Cross family to be an example of moral fortitude and genuine Christian charity that should be celebrated, not investigated. But the most powerful testimonies came from the children themselves. Lily wrote a letter in her careful, educated hand Claire had taught her well, describing how the Cross Ranch had saved her life, given her hope when she'd had none, transformed her from a broken, silent girl into a confident young woman with dreams and plans for the future. "Before Mama and Papa took me in," Lily wrote, "I thought my life was over. I was 9 years old and already certain I had nothing to live for. They showed me I was wrong. They gave me a family, a home, a future. They gave me myself." The twins submitted a joint letter with careful spelling and earnest phrasing. "We were bad kids when we came here. We thought being bad was easier than getting hurt again. Mama and Papa never gave up on us. They taught us we were worth something. Now we're going to run this ranch someday and make them proud." Even young Thomas, with Emma's help, dictated his thoughts. "Mama Clara tucks me in every night. Papa Ethan teaches me to ride horses. They keep me safe. Please don't take me away. This is my home." The inspector arrived on a cold March morning, a severe-looking woman named Mrs. Hartwell with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She carried a leather portfolio stuffed with papers and wore an expression that suggested she'd already made up her mind about what she'd find. Clara met her at the door with her spine straight and her chin high. She'd dressed carefully. Her best dress, hair neatly pinned, presenting the image of a respectable frontier matriarch. But she'd also made sure the house looked lived in, not artificially tidied. This was a real home, not a showpiece, and she wanted Mrs. Hartwell to see that. "Mrs. Hartwell, welcome to our home. Please come in." The inspection lasted 3 days. Mrs. Hartwell examined every room, interviewed every child separately, reviewed their education records and health records, checked the food stores and sleeping arrangements and sanitation facilities. She watched Clara and Ethan interact with the children, observed meal times and chore routines, asked probing questions about discipline and education and long-term plans. Clara answered everything honestly, refusing to hide or minimize the challenges they faced. Yes, resources were sometimes tight. Yes, the children had varying educational levels and some behavioral issues. Yes, she and Ethan were older than typical parents. But she also showed Mrs. Hartwell the reality of their lives, the love that permeated every interaction, the children's genuine happiness and security, the careful structure that balanced discipline with freedom, responsibility with play. The garden Lily tended with such pride, the twins working alongside Ethan and Joe, learning skills that would serve them for life. Emma's trousseau, carefully sewn by Clara and the older girls working together. Thomas's reading primer, showing steady progress under patient instruction. On the final evening, Mrs. Hartwell requested a private meeting with Clara and Ethan. They sat in the front room and Clara's heart hammered so hard she felt dizzy. Mrs. Hartwell opened her portfolio, reviewed her notes in silence for what felt like an eternity, then looked up at them with an expression Clara couldn't read. "I've conducted inspections at 17 facilities in this territory," she said finally. "Orphanages, foster homes, charitable institutions. I've seen children warehoused in overcrowded dormitories with minimal supervision. I've seen them worked like servants, underfed, undereducated, treated as burdens rather than blessings." She paused. "This is not that." Clara felt Ethan's hand find hers under the table, gripping tight. "The children here are thriving," Mrs. Hartwell continued. "Every single one of them spoke of feeling safe, loved, valued. Their education levels are appropriate for their ages and circumstances. Their health is excellent. The facility itself, while unconventional, is clean, well-maintained, and adequate for the number of residents." She closed her portfolio with a decisive snap. "My recommendation to the governor will be that this operation not only be allowed to continue, but be held up as a model for how vulnerable children should be cared for." Clara's breath left her in a rush. Ethan's hand tightened almost painfully on hers. "However," Mrs. Hartwell said, and Clara's heart sank again, "the legal structure needs formalization. I'm recommending that you establish this as an official children's home with proper state recognition. That will require some paperwork, some oversight, but it will also provide protection from future anonymous complaints." "We'll do whatever's necessary," Ethan said immediately. Mrs. Hartwell's severe expression softened slightly. "I believe you will. I've also made a note in my report about the need for state funding to support operations like yours. You're providing a crucial service, taking in children no one else wants. You shouldn't have to bear the entire financial burden alone." After Mrs. Hartwell left the next morning, Clara stood on the porch and watched the dust from her wagon settle. Relief warred with lingering fear. They'd won this battle, but the war of keeping their family together would be ongoing. Lily emerged from the house and stood beside her, now a young woman rather than the frightened child Clara had first met. "Is it over?" Lily asked. "For now." Clara put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "But we'll be all right. We always are." The formalization process took 6 months and required more paperwork than Clara had ever imagined existed. They had to document every child's placement, undergo background investigations, submit to regular inspections, maintain detailed records. It was exhausting and invasive and necessary, but it also brought unexpected benefits. The state funding Mrs. Hartwell had mentioned came through, not a fortune, but enough to ease the constant financial pressure. More importantly, the official recognition brought legitimacy. No more anonymous complaints, no more questions about whether what they were doing was proper. The Cross Children's Home, as it was now formally known, became an established institution. Word spread, and requests for placements increased. Claire and Ethan had to make hard decisions about capacity, about which children they could help and which they'd have to turn away. It broke Clara's heart every time she had to say no, but she'd learned that sustainable help was better than overextending and failing everyone. They settled on a maximum of 12 children at any given time, enough to make a difference, small enough to ensure each child received individual attention. As older children aged out or moved on, new ones would arrive to take their places. Emma married her young rancher in a beautiful ceremony at the Cross Ranch, with Claire and Ethan giving her away together. The twins started courting girls from town. Separately, thank goodness, Claire had joked. Lily announced her intention to become a teacher, inspired by wanting to help other children the way she'd been helped. "I want to open a school," Lily told Clara one evening, "right here, on the ranch, for our children and others from the area who need better education." Clara looked at this young woman who'd arrived as a traumatized, silent 9-year-old and become a confident, capable adult with dreams and plans, and felt pride swell in her chest. "Then let's make it happen," she said. They converted one of the outbuildings into a schoolhouse. Lily, now 21 and officially certified as a teacher through correspondence courses, began holding classes not just for the Cross children, but for neighboring ranch families who had no access to formal education. The school became another fixture of the ranch, another piece of the legacy they were building. Clara was 58 when Ethan fell ill. It started as a persistent cough he insisted was nothing, just dust from the fields. But the cough lingered and he began losing weight, and the doctor's face when he examined Ethan told Clara everything she needed to know before he even spoke the words. Consumption. The same disease that had taken Thomas all those years ago. "How long?" Clara asked, her voice steady despite the ice forming in her veins. "Hard to say. Could be months, could be years. He's strong, and we've caught it early." The doctor met her eyes. "But Mrs. Cross, you need to prepare yourself." Clara sat with Ethan that evening after the children were in bed, holding his hand and trying to find words. "I'm not leaving you yet," Ethan said, reading her fear. "I've got too much left to do." "You can't promise that." The words came out harsh, born of terror. "I can't lose you, Ethan. I can't do this without you. You won't have to do it without me. Not for a long time yet." He pulled her close, and despite everything, his arms were still strong. "And when that time comes, not now, but someday, you'll be all right. You're the strongest person I've ever known, Clara Cross. You'll grieve, but you won't break. And you'll have the children. They'll need you." "I need you," Clara whispered. "I know. And you have me, for as long as I can give you." Ethan fought the disease with the same quiet determination he'd brought to everything else. He modified his work, focusing on tasks that didn't tax his failing lungs. He spent more time with the children, teaching the twins everything they'd need to know to run the ranch eventually. He sat in Lily's classroom and watched her teach with obvious pride. He helped Thomas with his reading and listened to the younger children's stories with patient attention. He lived, fully and completely, making every day count. A year passed, then another. Ethan grew thinner, weaker, but his spirit remained strong. The children rallied around him, taking over more responsibilities, determined to ease his burden. The twins, now 18 and nearly men, became his lieutenants, running the daily ranch operations under his guidance. Clara watched her family pull together and found strength she didn't know she possessed. She'd already lost one husband to this disease. She knew what was coming. But this time, she wasn't alone in her grief. She had 9 children who loved Ethan as much as she did, who were facing this loss together. When Ethan finally became bedridden in the spring of Clara's 60th year, the entire family gathered around. Lily took leave from her teaching. Emma came from her own ranch with her husband and new baby. The 3 young adults who'd moved on years ago returned to say goodbye to the man who'd given them a second chance at life. Ethan faced death the way he'd faced everything, with quiet courage and grace. He made sure each child knew they were loved, that he was proud of them, that they should take care of Clara and each other. He held Clara's hand and thanked her for the best years of his life. "I was dead inside when I walked into your shop that day," he told her, his voice barely a whisper. "You brought me back to life, gave me purpose, gave me love, gave me a family. I wouldn't trade these years for anything." "Neither would I," Clara said, tears streaming down her face. "You saved me, Ethan. You saw me when I was invisible." "You were never invisible. You just needed to believe in yourself." He smiled weakly. "Promise me you'll keep believing, keep living, keep helping those kids. Don't go back to hiding. I promise." Ethan Cross died on a warm May evening, surrounded by his family, with Clara's hand in his and the setting sun painting the sky in shades of rose and gold outside the window. His last words were, "Thank you for everything." The grief was crushing, but Clara didn't face it alone. Lily held her through the first terrible nights. The twins handled all the ranch operations. Emma organized the funeral. Thomas, now 11, appointed himself Clara's shadow, making sure she ate and slept and didn't sink into the despair he could sense threatening. The funeral drew people from across the territory, former children from the ranch, neighbors, Townspeople who'd watched Clara and Ethan transform from scandal into legend. Even Mrs. Hartwell, the inspector, attended, paying respects to a man who'd changed so many lives. Catherine Mills spoke at the service, her words simple and true. Ethan Cross was a good man who lived a good life. He found love when he thought it was too late, built a family when conventional wisdom said he was too old, and left the world better than he found it. We should all be so lucky. After the funeral, after the visitors left, after the children were finally asleep, Clara sat alone on the porch where she and Ethan had spent so many evenings. The ranch stretched around her, alive with the sounds of animals and the wind through the prairie grass. Everything they'd built together. She felt Lily's presence before her daughter spoke. The young woman settled onto the porch step beside Clara's chair. "Are you all right, Mama?" Clara considered the question honestly. "I'm sad. I'll be sad for a long time, but I'm also grateful. We had 12 years together, Ethan and I, 12 years of happiness I never expected to have. Some people never get that." "What happens now?" Lily asked quietly. "With the ranch, with the children. Now?" Clara looked out at the land she'd come to love. "Now we keep going. That's what he'd want. The twins can run the ranch operations. You'll continue teaching. I'll keep taking care of the younger children. We'll honor his memory by living the way he taught us, with courage, with love, with purpose." "You're not thinking of giving up the children's home?" "Never!" Claire's voice was fierce. "This is our legacy, Lily, mine and Ethan's, proof that it's never too late to begin again, to build something meaningful, to love and be loved. I won't let that go." And she didn't. Over the years that followed, Clara continued running the Cross Children's Home with Lily as her partner. The twins managed the ranch, married good women, and started families of their own while still living on the property. The extended Cross family became a small community unto itself. Original children, their spouses, their babies, new children arriving who needed homes. Clara was 65 when a reporter from the territorial newspaper arrived, wanting to write a story about the legendary widow who'd built a family from orphans and transformed a scandal into an institution. She sat for the interview reluctantly, unused to being the center of attention. But as she talked about her journey, from invisible seamstress to ranch wife to mother of dozens, she realized the reporter was right. Her story was worth telling. "What would you say to other women who think their lives are over?" the reporter asked. "Widows who've resigned themselves to loneliness." Clara thought about the question carefully. "I'd tell them it's never too late. At 46, I thought my story was finished. I was wrong. The best chapters of my life didn't begin until I was brave enough to risk everything for a chance at happiness." She paused. "I'd tell them to stop being invisible. Stop accepting what other people say you should be. Stop letting fear make your decisions. Choose life, even if it's messy and hard and people judge you for it. Choose love. Choose hope. Choose yourself." The article ran in newspapers across the territory, then in publications farther east. Letters began arriving, dozens of them, then hundreds, from women who'd read Clara's story and felt seen, felt hope, felt permission to want more from life. Many of the letters came from widows who'd spent years in quiet despair, believing remarriage at their age was impossible or improper. Clara answered as many as she could, offering encouragement and honesty. Yes, it would be hard. Yes, people would judge. But the alternative, continuing to exist rather than live, was harder. Some women wrote back later with their own transformation stories. A 52-year-old widow in Kansas who'd married a widower and found joy again. A 48-year-old woman in Colorado who'd opened her own business despite her family's disapproval. A 60-year-old grandmother who'd gone back to school to become a teacher. Clara kept these letters in a special box, reading them when the nights were lonely and she missed Ethan most. Her story had rippled outward in ways she'd never imagined, giving other women permission to choose themselves. The years continued to pass. Clara's hair turned completely silver. Her hands grew increasingly arthritic, her steps slower, but her mind remained sharp and her heart remained open. The children kept coming. By the time she was 70, more than 50 children had passed through the Cross Children's Home, each one leaving with better prospects and fuller hearts than when they'd arrived. Lily married eventually, a quiet teacher from the next county who shared her passion for education. They had children of their own while continuing to help run the home. The twins' children grew up alongside the foster children, creating a sprawling, chaotic, beautiful family that defied conventional definition. Clara was 73 when she finally began to slow down in earnest. Her body was wearing out, and she knew it, but she'd lived fully, loved deeply, and left a legacy that would outlast her by generations. One evening, sitting on the porch with Lily and watching the twins' grandchildren play in the yard, Clara felt a deep peace settle over her. "I need to tell you something," she said to Lily. Her daughter looked at her with concern. "Mama?" "I'm tired, sweetheart, really tired, and I'm ready." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. She'd known this was coming. They all had. "What do you need from me?" Lily asked. "Just keep it going. The home, the school, the family. Keep helping children who need help. Keep showing them that love doesn't have to be biological to be real." Clara reached for Lily's hand. "And tell my story. Not for glory, but so other women know. It's never too late to choose life." "I promise, Mama." Clara spent her final months settling her affairs, saying goodbye to the people she loved, making sure the children's home would continue under Lily's management. She wrote letters to former children, now adults scattered across the territory, telling them how proud she was of them. She organized her papers, her memories, her story, and she thought about Ethan, waiting for her on the other side of whatever came next. She died peacefully in her sleep on a cool October morning, surrounded by family, 74 years old, and completely at peace. The funeral drew people from across the territory and beyond. Former children, now parents and grandparents themselves, who'd made special trips to honor the woman who'd changed their lives. The obituary that ran in territorial papers told her story simply. Clara Cross, born Clara Whitlock, seamstress turned rancher's wife turned mother to dozens. A woman who'd proven that courage blooms at any age, that family is built through choice and love rather than blood, that it's never too late to begin again. But the real legacy wasn't in newspapers. It was in the children she'd raised, who went on to raise their own children with the same fierce love and acceptance they'd received. It was in the other women across the territory who'd read her story and found courage to choose themselves. It was in the Cross Children's Home, which continued operating for another 40 years under Lily's direction, helping hundreds more children find safe harbor. Ethan had been right. Clara didn't break. She grieved, missed him every day for the rest of her life, but she kept living, kept loving, kept proving that the heart doesn't age. It endures. Years after Clara's death, one of the twins' granddaughters, studying to be a teacher like Lily, asked to hear the story of how it all began. How a small-town seamstress and a quiet rancher had built something that transformed so many lives. Lily, now in her 70s herself, smiled and began the tale. "It started with a coat that needed mending," she said, "and a woman who thought her story was over. But she was wrong. Her story was just beginning, and because she was brave enough to choose love over fear, to choose life over safety, she changed the world. Maybe not the whole world, but she changed our world. And that was enough." The legacy lived on, passed down through generations, a testament to the truth that had defined Clara's life. It's never too late to become who you were meant to be. Love knows no age limit, and the bravest thing you can do is choose to truly live, consequences and all, rather than merely exist in safety. Clara Whitlock. Cross had learned that lesson at 46, and she'd spent the rest of her life teaching it to everyone who crossed her path. In the end, that was her greatest gift. Not just the children she'd saved, but the permission she'd given countless others to save themselves. The heart doesn't age. It endures, it loves, it hopes. It chooses life again and again until the very end. And that, more than anything, is what makes us human.